and gentlemen, MEPs, deputies, dear guests, it is a pleasure for me to open the 9th meeting of the EU-Serbia Stabilisation and Association Parliamentary Committee to bid you welcome. Welcome to all of you. On behalf of my colleagues MPs, on behalf of the Assembly of the Republic of Serbia, let me voice my pleasure that this is the 9th time that we meet in this format to consider together all issues of interest for the accession of the Republic of Serbia to the EU. We particularly greet Madam Jadranka Joksimovic, Mr. Sam Fabrizi, the ambassador, on behalf of the EU delegation, Mr. Sateroti, the ambassador of Austria in Serbia, as well as our distinguished guests, ambassadors and representatives of the embassies of EU member states, as well as all other present guests. It is of particular importance that today the representatives of European institutions and the government of the Republic of Serbia shall give us their view of the state of play and the progress so far achieved, the expectations in the forthcoming period, and the manner in which it will be possible to intensify and further promote the process of Serbia's accession to the EU. I believe that we cannot overlook the fact that Serbia today is a state in which there has been significant headway, significant progress in all walks of life. That today it is a factor of peace and stability in the Western Balkans, and that it is a respected collocator in the foreign policy area. We should speak about the actual results in the working part of the meeting. I believe that these results will be recognized and that the next 10th meeting will actually be marked by a declaration in which, in addition to talking about our prospects for membership in 2025, we shall talk about this in very specific terms, the membership of Serbia in 2025. These meetings with our distinguished colleagues mean very much. This is an opportunity for us to ask questions and be given answers, to talk about challenges and solutions, because only mutual cooperation, mutual understanding can actually lead to the desired objective, which is pursued by both sides. As we all know, this is a strategic objective of Serbia, its membership in the EU, both politically and economically, but it is also of importance for the EU, because as also stressed in the strategy of enlargement, a firm prospect of membership in the EU for the Western Balkans in the political economic interest of the EU itself. This is a strategic investment in a firm Europe based on common values. So prior to proceeding with the first working session, I should give the floor to distinguished Mr. Kukan to greet you on behalf of the EU delegation and in his personal name. Mr. Kukan.
Thank you very much, my dear co-chair, excellencies, Madam Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the delegation of the European Parliament, I would like to thank the Parliament of Serbia for hosting the EP delegation at these beautiful premises. It is the 9th meeting of the SAPC EU-Serbia. On this occasion, I would like to express my sincere hope that we will engage in successful and constructive interparliamentary cooperation, which will contribute to the Serbia's EU accession process. I would like to point to the fact that the European Parliament continues to actively support the EU enlargement policy and advocate Serbia's accession to the European Union as the best way for countries' development and prosperity. The European Parliament, in its draft resolution on Serbia, states its position and makes recommendations on the necessary steps that need to be undertaken in order to address the major challenges and pursue EU-related reforms in the country. The Parliament's resolution was voted in our Foreign Relations Committee on October 9 and will be adopted in plenary session in November. And by then you will have a clear picture of what is the position of the European Parliament on the progress of Serbia. As we know, Serbia is well advancing in the membership negotiations. We welcome Serbia's continued engagement on the path of integration into the EU, and we urge you at the same time to actively promote the strategy decision among the Serbian public. However, in the entire enlargement process, we need to remember the big picture. This big picture is that we want a strong, fair union with new countries inside, which are as close to a current member states as possible. This means not only a formal legislative build-up of the legal system based on acquis communautaire. It means letting into the family of democratic states a new partner who functions on strong principles of rule of law, a partner who is stable to guarantee to be a home of free citizens who freely express their political will, a man or woman who can count on free, independent courts to judge about their rights, obligations, about their businesses, about their lives. A country where a person from a small town can trust that the court will be defending his or her rights when he or she would end in a clash with a powerful company or in a conflict with the family of an official representing the government. A state with free courts and with free media. A state serving free citizens. Let's remember that rule of law reforms will not only strengthen Serbia's democratic credentials, but it will also boost its economy as it will become more attractive for investors. Every time we open a new chapter, we need to ask ourselves, are we getting closer to the ideal model, or we are just ticking a box? Is the country getting another few percent of preparedness to this ideal member state of the Union? If we have doubts about it, we need to reflect about the basics. We often say that the year 2018 will be or is a year of chance for the Western Balkans, a golden opportunity. And indeed, the power of the renewed European perspective as announced by President Juncker 2017 State of the Union speech, then followed up by Commission strategy in February, the Sofia summit in May, and the June General Affairs Council conclusions is about to slowly bear fruit despite the difficult gestation period in the form of Skopje-Athens name agreement. Serbia and Kosovo could be next. Despite our disappointment with regard to the standstill of the last round of the EU-facilitated dialogue in Brussels, and our concern about the recent rise in tensions between Belgrade and Pristina, we hope that both sides remain committed to the EU-led dialogue with an aim of reaching a legally binding agreement in the coming months. The war finished 20 years ago, and now it's really the time to solve this. The momentum is there, and neither Serbia or Kosovo can afford to lose it now. The current limbo serves no one's true interest. The final deal is a chance to leave the past behind, overcoming long-standing disputes and opening up for more foreign investments, regional cooperation, greater welfare with a truly European perspective. I am a realist and I know how difficult it is. But as it often happens in life, opportunities come with an expiry date. Next year we will focus on the European elections, which polls say may give us a more inward looking EU that is far less willing to make progress on the enlargement agenda. It is therefore even more important for the Serbia and Kosovo reach a final deal still during the mandate of the current Commission and Parliament. I'll stop here because there is a long list of speakers and I wish all of us fruitful and successful debate. Thank you very much.
Hvala gospodine Kukan. Uveren sam da će diskusija o svim tim temama biti.
Thank you, Mr. Kukan. I'm convinced that discussion on all our topics will be interesting as always. We can start with the first working session of the 9th meeting of our Interparliamentary Committee. First, we have to adopt the draft agenda, and for this meeting we propose the agenda which was circulated by the Secretariat. All committee members should have it. So I'm asking both parties, do we have any proposals to change the agenda? If not, I declare the agenda adopted. You will also allow me one remark regarding point 9 of our agenda. The secretariats of both parliaments have sent the draft declaration and recommendations to both declarations. Both co-chair agreed on the present draft. We remind you that the amendments were gathered on time, as agreed, from both delegations and will be circulated to the board, or actually to committee members. We will discuss the joint declaration amendments when we discuss point 9. Point 2, minutes from the 8th meeting. The secretariats of both parliaments did circulate among the members the proposal of the meetings from Strasbourg. Serbian Assembly members had no remarks. There were no remarks from the EU side, EP side. So do we have any proposals to amend the minutes from the last meeting? No. Then I declare the minutes of the 8th EU-Serbia SAPC meeting adopted. Following point, the current state of play of EU-Serbia negotiations. Exchange with EU Council, Government and MP. We have keynote speakers, Minister for EU Integrations Mrs. Joksimovic, EU Ambassador to Serbia, His Excellency Mr. Sam Fabrizi on behalf of the Commission, His Excellency Nikolaos Luterotti, Ambassador of Austria to Serbia on behalf of the Austrian Presidency, and also we will have the reporters of both delegations, myself and Mr. Kukan. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Joksimovic. I thank you, and dear Chair, Mr. Orlic, Mr. Kukan, Co-Chair, Mr. Fabrizi, Ambassador Fabrizi, Ambassador Luterotti, dear deputies. Our meeting today of our SAA committee is taking place when we are expecting one so-called, as we call them, non-papers about Serbia's progress for chapters 23 and 24, which is supposed to be presented to the member states first half of November. For Serbian public and for our deputies and also MEPs, I have to clarify, this is not a binding report. Binding by the Commission when they report about the negotiation framework to the Member States. There is one obligation that twice a year Member States are to be informed. Once the regular progress report, which is usually happening the first half of the year, and for the second report it is not defined whether it should take place in any given month and whether it should be a report on paper. But last 2 years it is a regular practice in the Commission to generate one more paper, and we never challenge this practice to report Member States with this non-paper which is presented in November about the state of play in 23 and 24. This makes it impossible, however, for us to have an interim intergovernmental conference, which should take place in October, which was usual practice with the Commission before. But Mrs. Miščević, head of our negotiating team, and myself, we have asked Mr. Hahn, the commissary, to explain this practice. We are not complaining, we are not making much noise about it, we are just asking because it's nowhere written in our negotiation framework. But we are very interested to have everything agreed, respected, and to define in one partnership what obligations we have towards each other. Of course, continuation of the negotiations, number of chapters prepared before the end of this year. We have only one intergovernmental conference during the Bulgarian presidency. We know that Austrian presidency wanted to organize one so-called interim conference. It couldn't take place, but no big deal. So in November we will have 7, maybe more, negotiation positions ready, 7 chapters, maybe more, and we expect for this lagging behind, this sort of delay to be overcome, to be made up for. In this year of enlargement, as it is called now by everybody, for various reasons, we lost some time, some opportunities. It was not just delays due to Serbian work. We can discuss some other situations, some other reasons to do with the EU and EU institutions. So we have prepared 7 chapters. Some of these chapters are on the table for quite a while, like Chapter 9, Financial Services, Chapter 18, Statistics, Chapter 17, Budget and Monetary Regulations. Recently, we have sent our negotiating positions for Chapter 2, Freedom of Movement for Workers, Chapter Freedom of Movement of Capital, and we have finished all procedures in country for Chapters 21, which is Trans-European Network, and Chapter 14, Transport Policies. So these are real hardcore, concrete chapters, very important for the reforms in Serbia. And together with these 2 chapters, 21 and 14, all 7 will be presented to the EU member states. It is indeed our opinion, as Mr. Kukan said, real visible steps forward that were made in the domain of action plans and reforms in the domain of rule of law. I hope, I believe there is a lot of good quality material, good substance to open a package of chapters before December or in December. You know that a Hungarian minister appealed here in Belgrade for all 7 chapters to be opened. I'm realistic, I know it's not possible, but at least 3 chapters is something which Serbia expects before the end of December. The new chapters opened in our accession negotiations. Opening the chapters must not be an aim and an end unto itself. The end is to close the chapters. So rigidity in opening the chapters, rigidity in looking for special criteria to be met in order to open the chapters, need, I believe, to be replaced with a different approach. Because real reforms in some areas start only when the chapters are open. So opening the chapter for us, or chapters for us, is not a goal unto itself, but we really need to open as many chapters as possible in order to give new impetus to the reforms, in order to come closer to the final goal, which is closing the chapters. It's in the interest of the EU and also our citizens, who expect to see realistic, tangible results in the domain of the European integrations and reforms, which are in all the areas which are reflected in the 36 chapters. As for the progress expecting 23 and 24, I would stress some most important things. Constitutional amendments. You know that after the unsuccessful judicial reform 2004, Serbia now entered into an inclusive, transparent, serious process of dialogue. and not just dialogue, an active exchange of views, positions regarding the need to amend our constitution in the domain where it regulates the election of the members of the judiciary, to give them more transparency, more independence, and to increase the efficiency of our judiciary. I don't need to list you all the roundtables and who participated. You are aware of it. But the newest information, the most relevant one, I think, is that the Venice Commission submitted their opinion. We have adopted all the recommendations of the Venice Commission and incorporated them, put them in the amendment text. There was a memorandum made in which says that all the recommendations of the Venice Commission were respected in the final draft. This memo is available on the site of the Venice Commission, because the memorandum gives the position of the Venice Commission. And the government will soon come out with the initiative to amend, launch the initiative to amend the constitution. It will be tabled before the National Assembly, and here in the Assembly we will have public hearings in order to consult public consultations about the amendments. Legislation relative to chapters 23 and 24, government adopted two key laws, systemic laws, which were often criticized for their delays. First, we have finally adopted the law on free legal aid and the law on the protection of personal data. Both data passed the consultation with the Commission and Eurojust, and also in the final phase we have the draft of the law on the prevention of corruption. We have consulted the Greco experts, not just the European Commission experts, and we are considering the Greco recommendations, and once it is all completed in the draft, the government will deliberate upon it. Another thing relative to 23 and 24 are the activities relative to the media strategy. The process for media strategy was relaunched following an initiative of the President of the Republic. We have a new working group where the representatives of all journalistic associations are present, and we are convinced that now, with the help and mediation of the OSCE mission in Serbia, we will achieve a strategy which will improve the media situation in Serbia. Minorities. You know that the minorities law on the Council of Minorities was adopted in summer this year, together with the Council of Europe experts. It is in keeping with the highest European norms, standards for the minority protections. And on the 4th of November, I remind you, we will have the elections for the councils of the national minorities here in Serbia. Serbia is one of the very few states in Europe which has a very high level of guaranteed and protected minority rights. We will work on improving it even more, introducing new standards, but what we have now is above the standards in many European member states. It needs to be noted. Visa policy, which is an important part of the Chapter 24. Since the migrant crisis in 2015, we were not only active but a reliable partner of the Union and the member states. We tried in the most constructive yet humane ways to be part of the solution for this big migration wave that hit Europe in the past several decades. The situation now is slightly different. The migration pressure is reduced, but Serbia stays dedicated to the highest principles of international humanitarian law, way of treating the migrants. We are doing all our best to prevent all abuses. Regarding the asylum rights, we cooperate with the Union and with the member states. We have joined police patrols, like with Germany, for instance, in our airports for quite some time. We have an agreement passed with Frontex during the meeting with Commissioner Avramopoulos, and Frontex-Serbia cooperation will be defined fully. Harmonizing with the visa policy of the Union, which was often raised as an issue. We are fully aware that we need to harmonize with European visa policies by the time we joined the Union. So it was lots of articles in our press that we reintroduced visas for Iran citizens because we were faced with cancellation of the free visa regime for Serbian citizens. This is not true. Nobody in Europe started the procedures to cancel the free visa regime with Serbia. No, we ourselves realized that a certain number, important number of the visas, Iranian citizens who got Serbian visas were lost in the process, sort of swept through the evidence once they arrived to Serbia. We really had our both economic, cultural, tourist reasons for cancelling the visas for Iran citizens. We had to reintroduce them because we think as a serious candidate for the Union we have to register and react to certain negative trends which are not affecting our country only but affecting the member states. So I think this is a clear proof of our dedication to following the common European visa policies. So that's what I wanted to share with you about the government activities and, of course, parliamentary activities regarding the fulfillment of the obligations from the chapters 23 and 24. This is not, of course, the end of our work. There's lots of it still written in the action plans. We will carry on doing it. However, before I finish, I would like to mention a few more things, few important issues. And when I met President Vučić today and the representatives of the European Parliament, when they visited the President, we could discuss the issue of harmonizing with the joint foreign and security policy, the Chapter 31. There we have the whole discourse focused on the relations of Serbia with the Russian Federation, and it is completely forgotten and ignored. Not maybe ignored, but it's not on the agenda. Nobody looks at the contribution Serbia has given to the common safety and security foreign policy because the security challenges of today, Serbia always looked for solutions to working together with European partners in, for instance, joint security defense missions and fight against terrorism, and also managing the migration crisis. We were the first in the region, started harmonizing our strategic documents with the European strategies. European integrations are defined as national interest of the Republic of Serbia in all our documents. Our legal framework is totally harmonized when it comes to trade of arms, trade of dual usage goods, restrictive measures also. We were the first in the region who started building the system for the participation of civil experts in EU missions. We are participating in 4 military missions of the EU in Somalia, Mali, and Central African Republic. Number of our staff is way above anybody else's contribution from the region, and I think it would be important for all of those who do not agree with the screening report for the Chapter 21. It's more than 4 years waiting to be released. All of those who have doubts should be informed directly about this important Serbia's activities, which do contribute to the common foreign and security policy of the Union. Another important topic is the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. We often speak about the Chapter 35. Chapter 35 is the monitoring mechanism for the implementation of the agreed paths, agreed solutions from the high negotiations. So the only thing that we can say within Chapter 35 is that Pristina did not fulfill not a single one, let alone the most important obligation they have undertaken to fulfill, the association of Serbian municipalities. So I think it is important to note, to have it in front of us, who contributed how much to the implementation of the things agreed. Belgrade did fulfill its obligations entirely from the first part of the framework agreement of the normalizations of relationships. For 5 years, Pristina is not doing anything. So I think that the EU, as a co-signatory and guarantor of the agreement, should find ways to increase its own credibility as the mediator and as a guarantor of the agreement. Serbia, of course, will not give up the dialogue as the only way of achieving the agreement. The agreement should be based on a compromise. We cannot have an absolute winner or an absolute loser. That's Serbia's attitude. It's reiterated by the President many times, and this is the only legitimate and acceptable position in the Brussels dialogue. Unfortunately, we are faced constantly in the field, provocations, threats for Kosovo Serbs. Serbian officials are given hard time, people are arrested and so on, but this is the reality. Serbia, however, stays dedicated to the dialogue. We really mean what we say, but for the dialogue you need two sides participating actively, and also an active participation and credible mediation policy of the Union. I have to say that I'm very surprised to learn or to hear or not to hear about the European reactions to the statements from the so-called Kosovo's high officials, when the Prime Minister of the so-called Kosovo government, Mr. Hodžaj, said that Kosovo would first enter the UN and then we will get the Association of Serbian Municipalities. This is so irresponsible, as if I were here to say in this House, first Serbia will integrate the European Union and then we will implement the energy agreement once we are a member state, or something else which we agreed to implement. So Serbia will not act like that, not because we are weak, but because we are responsible. But we do appeal to have more credibility in this negotiation process, and we stay dedicated to the peaceful solution. Once I've mentioned all these important points in all chapters or topics, I really do want to assure you, in spite of this very unfavorable pre-electoral atmosphere in the Union, which is not at all in favor of the enlargement. But we know that Bulgaria, Austria, Romania as the next presidency will work on keeping the agenda, the enlargement on the agenda. We are extremely grateful to Austria, because Austria is continuously supporting the enlargement to the Western Balkans. But we are fully aware of the real situation, which is not in favor of the enlargement. But you know, this is not anymore the issue. We are constantly hearing, is Serbia ready to integrate the Union? Of course, we need to do many things. We need to fulfill criteria. This is not a question at all. But I am also asking myself, is the Union ready to accept, to integrate new member states? We look at the enlargement process as the meeting of two political wills, not the stick and carrot policy. Stick and carrot is the overcome political methods to the way of the strong ones dealing with the weak ones. And I find it difficult to believe that in the 21st century, the century of multilateralism, people are still talking about stick and carrot. These are multilateral processes based on two political wills, and I believe that Union will recognize its own interest in enlarging into the Western Balkans and recognize Serbia as the most important candidate. And for us, this is the best way to reform the country, to provide for our citizens the stability and more foreseeable, more certain future. In spite of all the future transformations of the Union, Serbia, as a responsible European country, will follow the European Union's transformations, and we will try always to keep harmonized with what is the best part of our continent and the part of the world where we have the best living. This is what we want to offer to the Serbian citizens, and that's why we stay firmly committed to the process of the European integrations. We hope that new chapters will be opened and new dynamics will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Joksovic. And now I'm going to call on the ambassador of the EU in Serbia, Mr. Fabrizi, who will speak on this topic of the agenda.
Pleasure to be here with you and the EU co-chair and member of the Parliament, Minister, my colleague from Austria Presidency, and I see also recognize many of my fellow EU ambassadors on the room. So it's a great pleasure to be here, address you on behalf of Federica Mogherini and Johannes Hahn, who certainly lend their wishes for the best results of this parliamentary committee. 2018 is, we are getting into the last quarter of 2018, which has been certainly a busy year for the relation of the European Union with the Western Balkan, Serbia in particular. And still, we should say that the perspective remain favorable. We started in the beginning of the year with an formation strategy. We had the Sofia summit in April. We had the June conclusion. Certainly, there's a really a good amount of good work has been done in the past 8 months to advance this region and Serbia in particular closer to the European Union. Certainly, if you look at the next few weeks and months, some of the next appointment has been mentioned. The Commission will make known his reflection on the state of the progress on the rule of law in a too distant future. We will have an intergovernmental conference by the end of the year, and the Commission is also busy starting to draft the next report on 2018, which will be published early in the first quarter of 2019. So busy year behind us, a busy year ahead of us, and certainly the general pillar of our negotiating framework are unchanged. The reform path will characterize the progress. Rule of law and normalization with the relation with Pristina will remain two elements through which the progress will be judged and made progress. If I have to look on the status today, maybe a few words on the economic part. Is in a part where we have seen the most important steps. As you know, Serbia is participating into the economic reform program. Is a peer-to-peer system of reviewed economic reform, which goes hand in hand with the preparation of Serbia to the European semester, to gearing up the Serbian economic policy to the future accession. And in May, the ECOFIN, so the Council of Ministers of the EU and the Western Balkans, including Serbia, agreed on a number of recommendations. So recognition of good progress on the macroeconomic stability. I think that the number of the economic growth give us the sense that not only macroeconomic stability is there, but also starting to produce growth and job. Certainly, there's also a number of recommendations on our side to make this growth sustainable, grow with a long-term perspective, a number of measures to increase the business environment to tackle some structural reform need to be there. State-owned enterprises, tax reform, public reform administration need to be made there, and certainly an increased boost of the role of the small and medium size enterprises. So economic reform on the right path. First signing of growth is there. We need to consolidate. Serbia needs to consolidate, and a number of reform are ahead of the country. In terms of rule of law, which is an area which is in the jargon of negotiators, called under Chapter 23-2024, is an area where we are assessing the progress there. The Commission will come, as I said, with a non-paper, which is a reflection on the state of the reform in the next few weeks. So without anticipating what will be the content of the paper, just to mention the few areas where most of the attention will be there. Certainly, reform of the judiciary is one of the areas where most of the attention was focused. There's an ongoing process of reform of the Constitution, and certainly we will look quite closely, both in the full compliance of the draft and eventually the final reform with what the Venice Commission has given his opinion about. Certainly another space of public consultation here in the Parliament when the text will arrive. This room, this committee and the plenary to have an inclusive, effective and constructive debate. Freedom of media, freedom of expression has been mentioned by the chair. Certainly is another area where we have expressed our own concern in our report of 2017. We are seeing issues still there. We will assess how the progress has been mentioned. The working group on media strategy is good. We encourage to find an agreed number of steps with the media association, and at the end of the day, this media strategy should transform into reform. Again, reform is what we are talking about. Fight against corruption and organized crime, a number of legislation has been mentioned. Again, implementation is what matters at the end. On visa, we have welcomed the recent decision to reintroduce visa particularly with Iran, but in any case with any country with whom EU does not have a visa-free. There's always an expectation that any accession country will follow the same rule. And certainly on migration, the agreement with Frontex, which has been initialed, it certainly is another important step in our cooperation. In the rule of law, maybe if I may, Mr. Chair, a word on the work on the Parliament. Our report has made a number of observations there. At the end of the day, we want to have Serbia need to have a strong pluralistic Parliament that is able to look at the scrutinize of the legislation. It is at the end of the day the voice of the people, and we are always available and happy to cooperate with the Parliament to make the institution even more strong. Maybe a couple of comments final on the Kosovo dialogue. The EU remain the facilitator for finding what we call a lasting and comprehensive agreement. Please, I pass the message of the High Rep. The EU remain fully committed to this objective, and we always encourage both sides to remain committed to find a long-lasting, comprehensive agreement. A regional dimension is very much important. The Western Balkan strategy came and remained as a regional strategy. Serbia plays an important role, both in terms of stability but also in terms of prosperity, the creation of a regional economic area, development of investment, and mobility throughout the area is extremely important, and certainly element of also reconciliation are extremely important to overcome legacies from the past. And last but not least, our reading on the foreign policy, so progressive alignment to the CFSP and CSDP of the European Union. Serbia is playing a role there, is committed with a number of activities, but we always remember that by the time of accession, Serbia should have a full alignment with our CFSP policy. So, Mr. Chair, before concluding, a final comment on communication. It's important that communication is done in a way that is the people of Serbia understand the benefits, what is the EU about, the benefits of the Serbia to being part of it, and already a number of work we are doing on the ground every day. With Minister Joksimovic, we do a number of events, a number of advocacy on a weekly basis, almost on daily basis, and encouraging to all the Serbian institutions to be vocal about the benefits of the EU for Serbia to be a part of the EU. So we remain committed as Commission. We have also continued to allocate our resources to help the reform to take roots and develop. We are in the area of 200 million euro grant per year, which is what the European Union taxpayer grant to Serbian taxpayer. I think it's important to, it's also a token of our commitment to help this reform. We have been consistent in this granting strategy in the past, in the current financial framework, which is called 2014-2020. We have allocated more than 1 billion euro in grant, and the Commission has already proposed to the Parliament and to the Council to increase by 20% the pre-accession fund for the next financial framework, which will go 2021 to 2027, in the recognition that reform are complex, reform are difficult, reform need time, reform need to take roots, but certainly the Commission will continue to do its utmost work and commitment to make this reform possible. So I wish this Parliamentary Committee a good work, and I thank you for giving me the possibility to address you. Thank you, Chair.
Hvala, gospodine Fabricio. Sada dajem reč ambasadoru Austrije u Srbiji, njegove ekscelenciji, gospodinu...
And I'm going to call on Ambassador of Austria on behalf of the Presidency of the Council of the European Union, Mr. Nicolas Luterotti.
Madam Minister, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Presidency of the European Union and of Foreign Minister Karin Kneißl, it is my great pleasure to address you today at this meeting of the EU-Serbia Stabilisation and Association Parliamentary Committee. As you may know, recently the Council, in its conclusions on enlargement and the Stabilisation and Association process on 26 June, confirmed that enlargement remains a key policy of the Union. And the Council also expressed the determination of the EU to strengthen and intensify its engagement at all levels to support the region's political, economic and social transformation. Having said this, and building on the work of the Bulgarian presidency, the Austrian presidency continues to strongly advocate for a concrete EU perspective for all southeastern European partners, the so-called Western Balkans. This is one of the three top priorities of our presidency. We aim to achieve concrete progress in the accession process of the Western Balkan countries and facilitate their path towards the European Union. To paraphrase Foreign Minister Karin Kneißl, whom I represent today, the EU cannot be complete without the integration of all Southeast European countries. In this regard, the Austrian presidency undertook various initiatives to strengthen this policy engagement with the region at different levels, be it at the level of regular briefings after PSC meetings, or after the informal EU foreign ministers meeting, or, for example, we organized a conference of Western Balkans European integration ministers with the aim to deepen cooperation and mutual support among the partners in the region while sticking to the merit-based approach. And we hope that this and other initiatives will help to advance cooperation in the Western Balkans region and with the European Union, and that it will be to the benefit of each country's individual path towards the European Union. As the Presidency, we very much support Serbia's strategic choice of joining the European Union, and we are putting a lot of effort into advancing the accession negotiations with Serbia. Indeed, we hope to be able to open further negotiations chapters in December. The pace of the accession negotiations, as we all know, continues, however, to depend on Serbia's progress and reform efforts, in particular in the area of the rule of law and on the normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina. The rule of law and fundamental rights, together with public administration reform and economic governance, remain the fundamentals of the accession process. Stepping up efforts in implementing the dedicated action plans and the interim benchmarks under chapters 23 and 24 remain therefore crucial. And I think it is important here to focus on effective reform implementation, including tangible results and a sustainable track record in the fight against corruption, organized crime, and money laundering. Safeguarding the freedom of expression and independence of the media is also of great importance. We look forward to the results of the work that is ongoing in Serbia right now. What is needed is a safe climate conducive to the unhindered exercise of freedom of expression and the independence of the media in the country. On economic governance, we congratulate Serbia for the progress towards establishing a functioning market economy, as well as the good performance of the Serbian economy in terms of GDP growth and improved fiscal situation. And we look forward to seeing a further improvement of the business environment and advancing on the implementation of structural reforms. Let me also underline that Serbia's efforts and constructive cooperation in tackling irregular migration flows in the Western Balkans region are being greatly appreciated. As a country negotiating accession to the EU, Serbia will also have to work together with the EU in other areas, and including to progressively align with the EU common foreign and security policy, as well as the EU common visa policy, where the conclusion of visa liberalization agreements with third countries on EU negative lists have raised concerns, but we also noted that Serbia revoked its visa-free policy with Iran just recently. Regional cooperation and good neighborly relations also continue to be essential elements of the enlargement process. We welcome Serbia's constructive engagement in regional cooperation initiatives. Sustained efforts to strengthen good neighborly relations should continue, and full cooperation with the mechanism of international criminal tribunals remains important. Regarding the normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina, we welcome that both sides had committed themselves vis-à-vis the High Representative to work on a comprehensive normalization of relations, including in the form of a legally binding agreement. We hope that both sides will remain engaged in the EU-facilitated dialogue, fully implement agreements reached so far, and engage in reaching further agreements in new areas. Co-chairs, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that the current momentum of European Union's re-engagement with the Western Balkans should be maintained and seized by all partners in the region, including by Serbia. This also includes to actively and unambiguously communicate about the strategic choice of joining the European Union in the public debate. The EU and we as a presidency stand ready to help Serbia on her way towards the European Union, because it is in the clear shared interest of our entire continent. Thank you very much.
Hvala gospodine Rutelzi.
Thank you, Mr. Luterotti. Ladies and gentlemen, now we should give the floor to our keynote speakers. We have 8 speakers on this item of the agenda. I'd like to draw the attention of all that 1700 hours is the planned end of this point. So you have the floor, Mr. Kukan.
I will leave out the statistic on chapters open and closed. I think Minister Joksimovic analyzed it quite deeply. The overall pace of Serbia's accession negotiation depends on its progress on the rule of law chapters 23 and 24 and its normalization of the relation with Kosovo, which is chapter 35. We are reaching a critical stage in the accession negotiations. What we want to see is a sustained pace of reforms, including a track record of their implementation in the area of the rule of law. This relates in particular to the ongoing work on judiciary, freedom of expression, and cooperation with civil society, and last but not least, parliamentary procedures. Rule of law, chapters 23 and 24. Some important developments on the rule of law are ongoing: constitutional amendments on the judiciary, work with journalists on media strategy, law on the anti-corruption agency. Serbia is expected to adopt new constitutional provisions in the area of judiciary, complying fully with the Venice Commission's recommendations, in line with European standards and based on wide and inclusive consultations. The Commission is following this closely and will assess progress in its non-paper on the rule of law in November 2018. Cases of intimidation, threats and violence against journalists need to be identified and prosecuted. We welcome the ongoing work on the media strategy, but expect this to deliver results. The goal is an enabling environment in Serbia in which freedom of expression can be exercised without any hindrance. As a parliamentarian, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of the Serbian parliament in the accession process. Its oversight function and effectiveness in scrutinizing legislation is essential for Serbia's accession negotiations, which require the adoption of a vast amount of EU-related legislation. The continuing use of urgent procedures and other parliamentary practices, merging of unrelated agenda items and the issuing of a large number of amendments, limits legislative scrutiny and the time for discussion on major legislative processes. This is a concern to us. Normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina is one of the key conditions for the EU entry. Therefore, it is essential to keep the ball rolling. As I mentioned earlier, we expect continued Serbia's and Kosovo's full commitment to continue the EU-led dialogue process with an aim of reaching in the coming month a legally binding agreement on comprehensive normalization of the relations between the two sides in line with international law. Full implementation of the agreements reached on the dialogue is also essential. Conclusions: in general, concrete, tangible progress on democratic institutions and the rule of law is urgently needed. We are reaching a critical juncture in the negotiations, where Serbia needs to prove that its institution and legislation work in practice and produce results. Serbia opened accession negotiations in January 2014, almost 5 years ago. The crucial rule of law chapters were opened in July 2016. If Serbia's ambition is to become an EU member in the course of 2025, it has about the same amount of time or a bit longer left to conclude the whole EU integration and negotiation process. The remaining time until 2025 will be needed for the lengthy and potentially cumbersome ratification process of the accession treaty, which will involve the European Parliament, where there is consent procedure and of the EU member states. Therefore, the current pace of negotiation is not adequate for Serbia to enter the EU in 2025, and therefore Serbia needs to substantially speed up reforms, particularly on the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Hvala, gospodine Kukan.
Thank you, Mr. Kukan. Let me latch on to this item of the agenda as one of the speakers. As already stated by representatives of the government, the Commission, as well as Mr. Kukan, you have given us your view of mutual relations. Let me once again underline the importance of the draft recommendations where we have jointly recognized Serbia's progress in many areas, but also the need to open technically prepared chapters. This is a joint conclusion. And we also gave our different perceptions of different issues. On this occasion, too, I should like to thank everybody for their positive messages, especially reflected in the enlargement, which is extended also to the Western Balkans. The messages have been received well, but the communication of all these benefits and integrations that Mr. Fabrizi has referred to, that we keep talking about, and all the political representatives in the Republic of Serbia keep highlighting this. I wish to say that these messages have had a positive impact. Latest surveys say that 55% of the citizens of Serbia support membership in the EU. The EU has been recognized as the major donor in our country. And 68% of the citizens believe that the reforms necessary for us to accede to the EU should be pursued independently of irrespective of our prospective membership, meaning that the citizens have actually recognized the value of these reforms for their own benefit. Also, in connection with issues of meeting benchmarks and criteria, the part of the reform which refers to the judiciary, there is another conclusion which is important. The Venice Commission and the debates about amendments to the Constitution, etc., all these have been assessed as successful, and the recommendations of the Venice Commission have been met. The joint conclusion that you have in the text of the draft declaration is important, which actually talks about financial stability, which it recognized the surplus in the budget, the real GDP growth of 4.8%, which actually puts Serbia among the fastest growing economies of the region. Then regional cooperation also remains one of the foreign policy priorities of the Republic of Serbia, and that needs to be underlined time and again. This is not only our obligation, but our lasting option. We wish to cooperate with all our neighbors. A stable region means a stable Serbia. A developed region means a developed Serbia. So this is a political priority number one, and that also contributes to our political priority number one, which is the membership of the EU. We are also participating in the Berlin process and have great expectations of that process. We have to mention, of course, the question of Kosovo and Metohija, addressing which remains of crucial importance. And since our last meeting, the situation has deteriorated significantly, and the reasons for that are as follows. In the past periods, Pristina had made some moves which adversely affected regional stability and the dialogue. When it comes to the establishment of the Association of Serbian Municipalities, let me underline again, we have been waiting for it for over 2,000 days at this juncture, so this speaks for itself. We have the question of property, cultural heritage, cadastres, land registry, questions of freedom of movement. No progress at all has been made in any of these. Then the unacceptable conduct of representatives of Pristina when Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia, visited, as announced, Kosovo and Metohija, the inadmissible entry of Hashim Tači into Gazivoda, the threats, the beating of Marko Đurić, in arrests and looting, etc., etc. There are so many examples. The last attack took place a few days ago prior to this meeting. Near Pechi, two buses with people who were on pilgrimage to the churches in Kosovo and Metohija were stoned. And these days they disclosed their intention of forming the so-called Army of Kosovo, which is something which leads to destabilization and certainly brings danger to the dialogue. And this has been done irrespective of any dialogue or any standards. We need to say that. We want to underline that we seek the greater support of the EU and greater understanding for Belgrade, because we are not talking about the political rhetoric of Pristina and their lack of will for any progress. We are talking about overt manifestations of force, which actually undermines the very foundations upon which the European Union is built. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is unacceptable. That all this should be happening without eliciting a reaction on the part of the European Union, especially as Serbia recognizes the European Union as a credible mediator in all this, in this entire process, and a guarantor of all agreements reached within that process. This makes it possible for Pristina to become reluctant, to remain reluctant to compromise and to remain reluctant in terms of reaching any agreements as part of an overall arrangement where we should actually see this famous issue of the normalization of relations materialize. Aware of all this, we, at the personal initiative of Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, launched this dialogue. And in view of all this, it is inadmissible to block the Republic of Serbia or to slow it down on its path to the European Union because of this kind of conduct on the part of Pristina. This is totally unacceptable as an idea. As in the past period, we have a nice, good track record because. And we are aware of the fact that acceding to the European Union is not an automatic process, but is something which should be based on the assessment of our results or anybody's results in the Western Balkans in keeping with their individual progress, recognizing the fact that the leading position in the process of European integrations has been recognized. Let me reiterate that I hope that we shall soon be talking about the certain membership of Serbia in the year 2025. That would really have an impact on the proper evaluation of everything that has been done in the domain of individual contributions and results. And we expect the European Parliament to adopt a resolution on this in terms of the progress achieved in the Republic of Serbia, and that this will actually lead to properly made conclusions on this issue. Thank you for your attention. The next speaker is Mr. Tang.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to have this discussion. We're discussing accession negotiations, and I don't think it's about accession. It's not about negotiations. It's about building a democracy and the rule of law. And every country has to work on democracy and rule of law. If in my country that's a discussion how the democracy functions and if the rule of law is still established the way we want it to be. And we do that because we want to achieve freedom of opinion, freedom of media. We want that because we want to protect individuals and minorities against exploitation and discrimination. That's what we want to achieve. And this requires work, and I don't see two political wills, Madam Minister. I don't see two political wills. For me, that's a common will, and that requires a common effort to achieve that. It's not one party dictating the other or whatever. This is a common endeavor, and an important endeavor, and this is how I see it. This is how I would like to defend, in my country, why Serbia should become a member of the EU. Because we established democracy and rule of law. I could also make it self-interested argument that Serbia is an important regional player, and that's because of regional stability that the Netherlands should welcome the entry of Serbia in the EU. But that's not the main argument I would like to make. It's always about establishing democracy and rule of law. That's the heart of the European Union. And you have seen fights with individual member states between Brussels and capitals exactly about this, because these are fundamental fights. We are a club based on these principles. And then I say, yes, progress has been made. But I'm also especially much focused, even though I'm an economist by training, I'm very much focused on these principles, on these, what we want to achieve. And then I must say that I am disappointed when I look at the World Press Freedom Index, and I see that Serbia is declining year after year, and is now below Albania, which I never thought was a role model in freedom of press. So yes, that I find disappointing. And I expect then Serbia to work harder on that, because this is what we want to achieve. And yes, I'm also, and I very much subscribe to the work by Edward Kukan, the role of this parliament. I just highlight these two, freedom of press and the role of this parliament. I can also see that, here that a lot of procedures are still done emergency style, emergency procedures. Still much of the legislation is done that way. But I can also read in the staff paper of the European Commission that the Parliament does not exercise effective oversight of the executive. I find that disappointing. I have been a proud member of my national parliament. I'm a proud member of the European Parliament because I like to work on establishing democracy and rule of law. That makes me proud to be a politician. It's hard work now and then, it's difficult work, but I'm proud to do it. And I think also this parliament has to look at their procedures and how they arrive at a political debate where it's not just one party that dictates the agenda, but there's room for the opposition, there's room for discussion and dialogue. And in this vein, I would like to contribute, see it as a common project to establish democracy and rule of law, because this is what we want to achieve here in Serbia, but elsewhere in the EU, because it requires a continuous effort to arrive at what we want to arrive at. Thank you very much.
So I will say a couple of words, of course, to answer you in English because of the efficiency. So first of all, maybe you haven't, maybe it's the missed in translation or something. I actually said that sticks and carrots as an old-fashioned pattern in realpolitik or realpolitik is something that cannot be used anymore in multilateral world, because EU accession process is a process of partnership presented by political will from EU and special member states or all member states and candidate country. So it was not about the rule of law. We are talking about political will. The accession process, yes, it is a meeting of two political wills, not stick and carrots, because I don't want to talk in that kind of language. So you do this and we will give you something, or please, in this moment we don't like our own procedures, so we will forget for the moment for the procedures because it's in our interest, because we are also a legitimate partner in this process. That was the point I wanted to send. There's no doubt about the rule of law, which of course is a basis of European democracy, or it should be, looking from outside today. Outside of European Union, we in Serbia, we also hope that rule of law and basic values are baseline and the substantial setup of European Union countries. And we certainly want to contribute to that. The problem when it comes to rule of law and measuring reforms is that there is no acquis communautaire directly connected with the rule of law. There is no specific model that we have to adopt to be fully in alignment with some specific acquis when it comes to rule of law. Because Austrian system, in some aspects, are quite different from, I suppose, your in Netherlands. And we are trying, and that's why Venice Commission was so important as a partner, to give us some set of standards that could be applicable to our own domestic political culture, political and historical background and heritage, and to be implementable, but to be in accordance with a set of, let's say, values and rule of law-based values of European Union. So there's no doubt about that. It was like only not measuring what is the minimum or what is the maximum, because it's not possible to discuss what is the minimum, what is the maximum. There is no key. The question is it something applicable and implementable in future? And that's why we wanted Venice Commission, and that's why we want OSCE as a mediator for this new media strategy discussions. Because as Mr. Kukan said, implementation. So we can adopt anything and everything in our parliament to be fully in accordance with EU. No. That's my answer. This is discussion. This is discussion. You are in parliament. I suppose you like discussion. I mean, not giving a lecture. That's my point of view. Thank you very much. I am guest today here, and excuse me if I have misused my opportunity, but I wanted to give, if there is a problem with expressing our own views, then I'm not sure what we are talking about. So that was, I just wanted to explain to you what was, maybe it was not a good translation, so there is no doubt about being rule of law being the substance of the EU accession process.
Because this is the debate I'm looking for.
Gospodine Tang,
this is the debate I'm really looking for, right?
Samo sekund da proverim sa službom prevođenja. Da li imate vezu? Čujete sve? Hvala vam. Izvolite.
Maybe it was lost in translation. And forgive me, I'm not a diplomat. I'm just a simple politician. So I speak out my mind. But from this common will, which I truly believe is here, I find in Serbia. But what I also find is sometimes a very defensive approach when we have these discussions. And I find it, let's say, almost annoying to find that every time we discuss freedom of media, I get a defensive approach. And I even saw physically your president shrug his shoulders. And this is not what I like to see. If this is from a common will, you should take this problem seriously. When Reporters Without Borders writes that under President Aleksandar Vučić, Serbia has become a country where it's unsafe to be a journalist. Well, you may not agree, but this is damning criticism, and you better take it up. And this is not from a point in my country also. We also discuss how to improve upon democracy. That's a very legitimate discussion. We should have, and you should have it now, but you will have it 10 years from now, you will have it 20 years from now. But I want you to engage in this discussion and not to have this defensive approach. This is the point I would like to see. This is from the common will I see. And from the common goal we have of establishing a democracy and rule of law.
Hvala. Najavit ću sledećeg prijavljenog za reč, ali iskoristit ću jednu rečenicu prostora da dodatno osvetlimo temu uloge parlamenta i upotrebe hitnih procedura. Sećate se sigurno tokom poslednjeg sastanka u Beogradu, da, jasno je rečeno da je procenat zakona koji su usvojeni u našoj Narodnoj skupštini po toj vrsti postupka značajno niži od onog procenta zakona koji su na taj način usvojeni od strane drugih država kada su se nalazili u ulozi Srbije, dakle u ulozi kandidata. Dobra vest je da smo u poslednjih godinu dana još dodatno značajno smanjili broj zakona koji je usvojen po hitnom postupku, tako da smo sada na značajnom rastojanju od onoga što se smatralo standardnim i naravno u tom smislu prihvatljivim za druge kada su se nalazili u istoj ulozi. Verujem da je ovo dobar odgovor na vaše pitanje. Sledeća prijavljena je gospođa Kovač. Izvolite.
Zahvaljujem. Ja se obično prijavljujem za temu osnovna prava i tu govorim o pravima nacionalnih manjina, ali ovom prilikom sam odlučila da se prijavim i ovde i razmišljala kako da koncipiram svoje izlaganje Većina tehničkih stvari je rečena i zaista imamo malo vremena i trudit ću se da budem brief, što bi se reklo, ali ću se bazirati na dve stvari, trudit ću se da odgovorim prethodnom govorniku na neka pitanja vezano za kontrolu izvršne vlasti od strane parlamenta. Sada ću govoriti kao zamjenica predsjednika Odbora za evropske integracije, pošto smatram da je naš zadatak izuzetno značajan. Uvažena ministarka je iznela da zaista imamo tehnički spremno 7 pregovaračkih pozicija i vi vrlo dobro znate da mi imamo našu rezoluciju o tome kako zapravo usvajamo pregovaračke pozicije. Kada one stignu u Narodnu skupštinu, najpre matični odbor u čijem delokrugu ili nadležnosti je određena tema, raspravi o toj pregovaračkoj poziciji, a mi ono na šta smo ponosni i što nije puka farsa ili forma, pozivamo predstavnike Nacionalnog konventa i sa njima imamo vrlo konstruktivne sastanke.
I'm sitting there, are other members of the committee. I'm usually seated at those meetings, and I can tell you that the NGOs, CSOs, experts, people from different fields, different academic fields, are very happy to participate, and that this dialogue is really inclusive. The only unclear things is that before we open the negotiating position, I mean, it's restrictive. The Commission doesn't see the whole position before we adopted it here in the Assembly. Sometimes Commission proposes amendments on this summary. But it is open in the Assembly when it comes to the committee. We debate, and these negotiation positions are being opened. The negotiations are being opened. And they have the possibility to participate in drafting strategies in other documents, the CSOs and the convent, and I think this is very good, and we'll try to make it even stronger in the future. Last week, as you heard, we discussed chapters 14 and 21. This is the new group which didn't function since this year that they exist. Sometimes they complain about the procedures. We think 15 days is enough for them to give their opinions, to have the dialogue, and if we agree on some amendments, the Committee for European Integrations proposes these amendments. We've heard here that we do not participate enough in the control of the executive powers, that the procedures are not good. The procedures are set down by the regulations, rules of the House, which we inherited. Probably we have to change it. That's a different point. But the MPs can ask the question every Tuesday and Thursday in the morning without the presence of the government representatives. And when we have the government representatives here every last Thursday. We criticized that we didn't have these last Thursday. And we heard that we are going to have ministers coming. Last Thursday they were here with us. Next Thursday we will have an also. And the problem is that when we had the rules of the House, we wanted to start with small group parliamentary caucuses and then to give the floor with the bigger and bigger ones. But we have lots of caucuses in the Assembly here, anything between 13 and 16 MP groups. 5 is the smallest number. So we have MPs from position or opposition asking questions. Government members are not time limited. So in 3 hours we have only 5 or 6 questions. The others do not make it. So I think you cannot say there is no at all parliamentary oversight. Maybe we can improve this, but we cannot say to an MP, you asked a question a month ago, you cannot ask a question now. And of course every select committee can according to the rules of the House, sit once in 3 months, look at the government's report for that area and look into the work of the ministries that deal with this field. our Committee for European Integrations. I can say we're very proud because the ministry is working on the negotiating positions, but sometimes we didn't get the reports. But now we caught up, and both the minister and the head of negotiation team are coming to the assembly to talk with our committee willingly. Since Mr. Orlic spoke about the support for the EU integrations, the statistics, the surveys tell us that support for the EU in Serbia grew for 3% this last year. I think it is important that the citizens see that the EU donations with 4.31 billion euros from 2000 to 2016 are the biggest Union and member states are the biggest donations in Serbia. But we really need to make it more present in the spirit and minds of our citizens. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kovac. Mr. Weigel, I thought you wanted to join the debate. Do you want to speak about now? You want to speak now on what we've heard now? Yes, I did ask for the floor twice, after your presentation and after Mrs. Minister. You know, we come here to Belgrade as partners. Partners, you members of parliament, and with our presence here, we represent the partnership of the European Parliament regarding the European future of Serbia. We come here as friends. And I think there is no point whatsoever listening to lectures from your side as if we were tourists on a school trip coming to Serbia and we are going to buy everything you might choose to say and that we will forget anything we hear from somebody else. We talk with diplomats here, ambassadors of the European Union member states, European ambassador, and some of what we are saying here is how we interpret the informations we got from people who are living here with you in your country, who are very close to you, much closer than us who visit occasionally. Therefore, what my colleague said should not be heard in a very defensive position. We are not here to attack. We come with good intentions. And therefore, I really am not happy with how I have a remark there, I am not happy how you, Mr. Orlic, talked about the problem of Kosovo and how the European Union is reacting to what is happening in Kosovo. Us in the European Parliament, we do react to every new situation happening in Kosovo. We are very worried with every incident in Kosovo, but the fact is that the incidents in Kosovo are not provoked only by the Kosovars, but are provoked also by you, your side. And the people who are coming uninvited to somebody else's house are definitely not welcome. So I think you can answer me for an hour now how mistaken I am. But what I heard this from the people who are very close to what is happening there actually in the field, who know what is really happening down there. Speaking with your president, I said something about the vision, how such problems are to be solved, and I will repeat it here in the House. Us as people, us Slovenians, we have lost 1/3, at least 1/3 of our national territory as part of different peace agreements. And Slovenes are minorities in Austria, in Italy, and it was very painful for us. Now we have excellent relationships with our neighbors, and the minorities are happy because they're the bridge between the states. And it is not an absurd simplification when I say that there is a solution for the Kosovo problem in the European format, in the future European membership of Serbia. And I believe, this is my personal opinion, of Kosovo in the Union as well eventually. Therefore, I would ask you not to play the hard ball towards us, not to try to pressurize us. We have our opinion, which is built on facts. We have our own opinions also based on our own vision. Therefore, the way of pressurizing us really is not on the repertoire of the normal, regular, diplomatic and parliamentary dialogue. Thank you very much.
Mr. Legel, I was understand your intervention as your complaint to the manner in which I'm chairing the session. We had a live discussion like last time, and this is a possibility for anyone to react to all comments. We provide space for dialogue here every time we meet. That is the situation this time as well. So when you present your case, that is acceptable, of course, and we have enough time for this item on the agenda. So the idea is to exchange opinions and ideas and to make this meeting meaningful and to meet its purpose. The last meeting in Strasbourg was the last opportunity to tell you what happened to Mr. Marko Đurić. You will never find it as an example on the other side, as a counter-example. And this is the same thing that happened when Mr. President Vučić visited Kosovo. So you will not happen that anyone who wanted to go from Pristina in form of barricades and soldiers. So I'm very sorry for Mr. Hökmark for having to wait, and please, you do have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Don't be sorry for me. It was interesting to listen to, and I think it's quite good that we have this debate. I think there is one thing forgotten, or I don't think, maybe not forgotten, but we tend to not take it as a part of the discussion, and that is that we want you in. We want Serbia to be a member. That's why we are here. And I must say, I reacted also to this saying that this is something about sticks and carrots. It is not. This is not about sticks and carrots. This is not about tit for tat. This is about what sort of society do you want to be. And I would like to say that there is no cause for reforms that we are talking about that shouldn't be good for Serbia even without the membership negotiations. A well-functioning rule of law, better fight against corruption, accountability in Parliament. And of course, accountability in Parliament is not about an isolated procedure. It's a way of creating transparency about the differences between political alternatives. But we want you in because you're an important country stabilizing this region regarding the economy. And it's not only about that Serbia is participating in military operations in Mali and Central Africa, etc. If you look upon investments coming from abroad in Serbia, it is coming from EU 8 or 9 times more than from anyone else. Pre-accession support or development aid, it is EU institutions and EU member states totally dominating. The same applies to trade. This is an expression that we are belonging to each other, but it's also a fact that then we need to see what sort of society are we to be. And when we are raising problems, we are not doing that in order to create hindrances. We are doing it in order to sort out the problems. And we are not negotiating just now and not discussing negotiations with anyone else than with you. And that's why we are focusing on the development in Serbia and what Serbia wants to be. And I can't understand, and I'm very serious and frank here, if we have views on the freedom of press. We are not doing this as a stick and carrot operation or a tit for tat or to create problems. We are highlighting problems as we do when we see those problems in any other country. And we do, as you know, have that discussion in a number of the member states just now. This is our way of contributing to the development of Serbia, achieving a society that we all want to share. It's not about stick and carrot, it's about having a partnership in a much bigger fruit tree. But if so, we have to also understand what society wants to be versus, for example, Russia. I mean, it's not a matter of choosing between EU and Russia. It's a matter of choosing between rule of law, democracy on the one side, or an authoritarian development with closed borders on the other side. And it's not about saying that we are critical to Serbia as such. All we want is to have a development where Serbia, as soon as possible, can enter as a member. You, Mr. Chairman, mentioned 2025. I think that's a good target. But we all know that it's not just a matter of time will change and then suddenly you're a member. The time is set there because this is a time where we find it is possible and feasible to do the reforms. And in some way, regarding competition, regarding rule of law, regarding foreign policy, these are the choices which we have to deal with. But in the bottom of that is what sort of societies do we want to be? And please don't say that we are using stick and carrot. This is not what this negotiation and these discussions are about. They are about us wanting you to be a member of the European Union and sharing not only same values but also institutions that are together. That doesn't mean that each country needs to be the same. There are differences between, I can disclose, between Netherlands and Sweden. They are better in football for the time being, for example, but other differences that are more serious. Well, anyway, they didn't come to the championship. I forgot that. Oh, I insulted you. So what I mean is, we are different, but we are sharing some fundamental rules that we can't compromise. Not with sticks and carrots and not with tits and tats. And that's why we are here, because we want you in.
Hvala, gospodine Hochmark. U tom smislu se...
Mr. Hochmark, and I think that we agree fully. And Ms. Minister Joksimovic criticized people who use the words such as sticks and carrots and that they are not due at this point of time and situation. We heard something about the real objectives, real goals of European integrations and what are they all about. In 1996 in winter and in October 2000, hundreds of thousands of people protested carrying the EU flags and their member states. And they have paved the path and the mandate to the present government right now. We are here sitting in this room. We were on the side of the protesters and who are now in power, and we knew that we were fighting for human rights, social justice, fighting for against corruption and crime, better education, fair competition, and finally better quality of life or a standard of living. So these are objectives, not opening or closing chapters, and these are the standards, the benchmarks of success. we have the law, and which is will begin tomorrow. The law will not be an urgent one, but the session has been convened, scheduled upon an urgent, so we don't have a reduced urgent procedures for adopting laws as a reflection of a desire for more democracy. We have percentages that we are not even adopting international treaties on the basis of an urgent procedures, and then we have statistical indicators for our partners in Brussels, the sessions where we ask the question and answer period for the government. I did not reply. We had an opportunity to see when there's a parliamentary debate, when the chair is chairing sessions, when you have 3 minutes for questions, and the ministers answer 15 or 20 minutes each, and then again you have a possibility of asking a question in 2 minutes, and then there's 5, 6, 7, or 8 ministers reply, and then you have a final 2 minutes for concluding. And when the session is finished at 7 p.m., you will not get your answers, or not even then. So it's very difficult to be opposition in Serbia, which is very pro-European, and find the right measure of criticism and not to fall into the trap to hinder its progress towards the European Union for Serbia, which you too desire. So that is a very unpleasant and uncomfortable situation that Serbia's opposition is in now. And also we see that the government is becoming very stronger, and at the same time we're not applying European standards, whereas at the same time it is praised by the European Union. So in two contrasting things, there is something that is unknown to the public, and I believe that the debates at meetings like this joint parliamentary committee, it's a tool for the citizens for us to explain to the citizens what is behind two contrasting things. So, for example, we have elections for the national councils of national minorities, where you have not presented your list supported by the ruling party financially and in human resources, etc. You have a number of problems. You have 6 or 7 electoral lists, and all of a sudden you establish that you are not recorded in the voters list, and then you cannot be first, even though you have met all the met all the conditions. And then you have a mass subscription to the lists including people that do not belong to the minority groups, but they belong to the majority nation. So there's no compromise with fundamental European values, no matter how fast we want to join the European Union. If we are going to achieve successes at the bureaucratic red table, we're going to compensate the overall democratic principles, and we are faced with the main problem. The Agency for Anti-Corruption Agency, the High Judicial Council, National Educational Council, are such that all these bodies are controlled by the ruling party, and that is happening by applying constant mechanisms, by prescribing change of composition and change in powers, in competences. And we always receive an answer. We had a majority at the elections, and this is why we can do this. We have to understand democracy is not the tyranny of the majority over a minority, but it is the protection of minority. Even those who receive 0.1% in elections, and their voice is also worthwhile. Just a few more things related to the media. We have a situation where a journalist does an investigative program about the death of workers in a factory, and then the trade unions protest against this journalists because and the trade unions support them because she wanted to find out how much did the conditions of work contributed to the death of the work, and then we're saying that they don't have to condemn every attack on the journalists. So the safety of journalists selectively treated in a selective manner. Yes, so all independent journalists of Serbia, Vojvodina and Serbia return to the working group, but very conditionally and very cautiously, because if they continue, we have threats of to the journalists, they will be ready to leave the club. Unfortunately, parliamentary debate in our country is at the level of a tabloid mutual criminalization between the opposition and those in power, and that to me is demonstrates the absence of rule of law. So if you can tell the other people sitting in the same room that they are criminals, that they have plundered the state, yes, and if such people are still free and they're run in elections, and well then go and arrest them if they're criminals. Do something, erase them from the political seal if they are what you claim that they are. They should not be on the political scene, or else they're not what you say they are. But let us not include and introduce tabloid criminalization in the parliamentary debate. And one more thing, and I will cloak pensions. We had law, and this was a way to show European standards and values, like the example in Latvia, where the pensions were reduced during the fiscal consolidation. There are a few other European examples. So I'm going to appeal and let Serbia show the same example to return that they Latvia actually returned the amounts to the pensioners, and it turned into a loan, actually. So it would be wonderful, brilliant if Serbian would do the same, return the money to pensioners.
Thank you. Just a technical explanation. As regards the laws which form part of the official statistics, when we talk about the number of laws adopted in this or that way, all laws form part of the statistics. They are included, both those laws which have to do with the proclamation of international treaties and those which are not. This is the case this year and has been the case. Hasn't changed. We still have two speakers, and Mr. Arsic also wishes to take part in the discussion. Madam Fayon first. You have the floor. Thank you, Chairman, distinguished guests, distinguished colleagues and friends. I sincerely hope that at this session we will adopt recommendations as we did in June in Strasbourg, recommendations which will be of assistance, which will perhaps give some additional strength to Serbia on its path to the EU. I'm always glad to see that we conduct this frank discussion, because as politicians, after all, we are all responsible and accountable for what we do to our peoples. We have common challenges. What I'm most concerned about when I follow the situation on the one hand in the European Union and on the other hand in the region, from globalization to countering terrorism, illegal migrations, etc., etc. So these are our common joint challenges, which is why today I believe that we need each other much more than we used to like 20 years back in order to maintain the stability and peace throughout Europe. This is not just something which is in itself and of itself normal today. We are talking about nationalist, populist, radical trends that we witness throughout Europe and in the region. This is extremely serious. So as politicians, we should be aware of where our responsibility lies, and we should go about doing our work, having all that in mind. I sincerely wish for Serbia to be a strong country in the region. Congratulations for your economic growth and progress. We are here to see what you have achieved, what you have done, and we are here to tell you what we feel is perhaps not the best. So this has been referred to a number of times. When it comes to the rule of law, when it comes to constitutional amendments, these are necessary. We don't want to see a Serbia where civil society and NGOs still feel that nobody is heeding their word, that there is no public debate in Parliament about reforms when it comes to the European Union. We heard the Prime Minister says that the Serbian public is extremely polarized and the politics does not enjoy credibility. And this is something that we also feel that it has actually lost a lot of its credibility. I mean, the body politic. I perhaps am the second generation. We Slovenes actually joined the European Union with a lot of enthusiasm. After many years of that enthusiasm, we still feel that the European Union has brought a lot of positive things to us. And now when we look at the Eurobarometer and the citizens of the European Union also, as do we, feel that membership of the European Union is very important for all of them because of these joint challenges. What worries me in that context is this perception of the European Union in Serbia. It is not that positive. On both sides, we should work towards actually telling the people what the European Union is, what it will bring to the citizens. The citizens need to know what happens throughout the process of Serbia's accession to the European Union. I believe that we all on both sides should do more to improve this perception in the region of the European Union and to pursue this common objective. And when we talk about media freedom, what the government does is one thing and implementation is another thing. We still have numerous incidents, attacks on journalists. I believe that 73 is the number of incidents this year only, this year alone. We have this lack of clarity, total lack of transparency in terms of the ownership of media outlets. The epilogue of the Savamala incident is unknown. So we also have other things in connection with the lack of independent agencies, the independence of the judiciary. These are all things which actually underlie the lack of confidence of the citizens. I hope that the reforms, which are of course good for the creation of better economic conditions, will also have as a result, as part of this long, laborious and lengthy process, improvements in these areas as well, which is, of course, good for Serbia and for the entire region. This would be my message and my call upon everybody, because I often hear from young people who still live in Serbia that they would very gladly go to a Western country where the living standard is better, where the salaries are better. These are educated, well-educated young people who should remain and live in Serbia. Today we heard that 5 million people have left Serbia, or citizens. I'm not quite sure whether this is an official statistical figure, but that is an enormous number. This is the number of people who left Serbia after the wars in the past decades. But the brain drain is at any rate huge, especially young people whose confidence in institutions has dwindled or is lost, and who no longer have any hopes or visions of their futures, no prospects in their minds. To us, it is a great concern of what happens in this region. We are not indifferent to that. We are heading for European elections in the European Union. Who knows what will happen after the European elections, what the composition of the European Parliament and the European Commission will be, what will happen with the next wave or round of enlargement. Perhaps now is a good time for us to talk about enlargement again, to be aware as Europeans, on the part of the European Union, that it is of the essence for Serbia to continue on its path towards the European Union, that it should be a strong and credible country, and as such have a positive impact on all its neighbors. Thank you. Thank you. I propose that we conclude the list of speakers after Mr. Arsic, and Madam Tomic also wishes to speak. Or are there any other people who wish to speak? If not, then Madam Markovic. Thank you. First of all, I should like to say a few words about the importance of strengthening regional cooperation. But prior to that, let me say that we in the National Assembly of Serbia work according to a procedure that we haven't changed, rules of procedure that we haven't changed, and the debate has to be limited by deputies groups. So it is allocated according to the number in a specific group or the results at elections. If, for instance, an independent deputy has 5 minutes to speak on a law, the rest of the people have the same amount of time, irrespective of their numbers. So the time allotted to the different speakers is such that there is no such discrimination at all. As regards regional cooperation and its importance, which I wish to underline, and the need to strengthen cooperation, regional cooperation, this is one of the priority in the Republic of Serbia, and as is regional stability. We have shown that the political will for that exists, both in the political and economic domains, as attested to by numerous meetings by our government members and MPs. We from the Committee for European Integrations are very much engaged and active on that score. Let me also underline the importance of the Berlin Congress. I'm glad that item 14 of our declaration, drafted declaration, supports this process. In Parliament so far, we have adopted 3 agreements, the fund for the Western Balkans, the transport community, and the one on opening regional office for young people with its seat in Tirana. This is as part of the Berlin process. So we have representatives of the NGO, of the Chamber of Commerce meeting, and 5 summit meetings have been held so far, but the MPs of the parliaments of our region have not met as yet, and I believe that this is a shortcoming. What is new in that context that we met in Tirana several months ago at the invitation of the Office for Young People, RAICO, and we signed a joint initiative which we shall be addressing to the next summit meeting, so that we hope that they shall be redressing this mistake. All numerous challenges faced by the European Union were mentioned: migrant crisis, fighting terrorism, etc. But all that notwithstanding, at the Sofia summit in this year, the European Union showed by its positive messages on enlargement that it is not abandoning enlargement, as we also heard in Thessaloniki. The migrant crisis has demonstrated that all countries of Europe need to cooperate, not just EU members, because this is a common problem. And that's why I think that enlargement is important, not only for the sake of the stability of the European Union, but also of our region. What particularly worries me is the increase of populist and right-wing parties, especially of parties which advocate leaving the European Union, their countries leaving the European Union. And as Madame Fayon just mentioned, we wonder what the European Commission and the European Parliament will look like after the forthcoming elections. So although we keep talking about the progress of Serbia, this is something that we certainly have to bear in mind, because that will certainly influence the positions of the European Commission on enlargement, on the enlargement issue. I do hope for a positive outcome, that after the elections, the majority will be in favor of enlargement. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Markovic. Mr. Arsic wishes to discuss on the issue up to 2 minutes. I shall try to be as brief, Chairman. I don't know whether I shall manage. First of all, welcome to all colleagues from the European Parliament. When Serbia embarked on the accession procedure, they told me that the MPs actually should pursue a joint European policy, and I recognize that. I expect that in a dialogue which we can conduct, we can arrive at some conclusions which would lead to the enlargement of the EU. I also feel that it is the legitimate right of colleagues from the national parliament, if they're against our accession to the EU, to say so. But I also call upon our colleagues from the European Parliament that if they feel that Serbia should not be a member of the European Union, to also say so, because this is something I hear for the first time here, or see for the first time here, that at a session like this one, in which perhaps we do not share positions on some issues, we can see speakers interrupted or some criticism leveled at the chairman. I have been an MP for many years, and I've seen all sorts of things. The issue of the rule of law is something which, of course, should be discussed. Human rights, we are prepared. Freedom of media, freedom of expression, thought. These are all things that we should discuss. But what surprises me from my colleague MEPs is that they consider their source of information as correct and credible. Maybe I'm not right, maybe I'm mistaken, but events, developments always show who was wrong. It is true, there have been attacks on journalists in Serbia, but nobody from the government or the authorities attacked them. 2 or 3 later journalists were attacked outside their workplaces and beaten up. The state authorities and organs reacted. And those who feel, who are not our fellow-minded people in terms of policy, they actually accuse us for not protecting properly journalists, or the way in which we went about such incidents. There are many such examples. I could go on, but as an MP, I tell you at this point, because we are colleagues, because I see that the question of work in Parliament, the adoption of legislation according to specific procedures, this is something which has been referred to time and again. There do exist procedures. Are they good or bad? This is something I cannot delve into right now. I am an MP, and I have to implement the act which actually regulates the procedure. The problem here is not expressing opinions and debating in the Parliament. What is the problem is endeavors by my colleagues, by their absence and non-participation in the debate and in the work of the Assembly to show that we have a problem here. This is statistically proven, how much time they have, how much of their time they actually utilize. I'm not going to say whether it was politically correct or not, but just how much of their allotted time they actually utilize. I'm speaking exclusively about proof. I'm not entering into any subjective or objective assessments or views. When we talk about the freedom of speech, to check this situation, I'll be finishing, colleague Olic, in 30 seconds. So, freedom of expression of speech. I would go to the first kiosk selling newspapers, newsstand, to see what it looks like, and watch some programs on television to see what the situation is like. And this would be it from me for my first time. Thank you. Thank you for your understanding, because we also have discussants wishing to participate in the discussion on other agenda items, so that we will have Madam Tomic up to 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished colleagues, let me just latch on to what colleague Arsic has said. When he talks about the time allotted to the opposition or the opposition, you should know that of 17 political parties, 10 are opposition and 7 are position or government parties. All the authorized representatives have 20 minutes each. And in discussing amendments, they have 15 minutes. So to begin with, they have over 90 minutes more than the position for various items, not counting the amendments, which simply says that they do not want to sit in the assembly hall and do their job. When we talk about the rule of law, when we talk about whether we think that somebody is taking decisions in keeping with European directives, conducting reforms, etc. If you really want to be fast and to introduce changes in society, you need a large number of legislation brought. It is only logical that the procedure should be abbreviated. If not, you would not be able to pass 30% of what is required for alignment with the acquis. That is one of the reasons why we proceeded in this way or at that pace in the past years. Now that we have a specific track record, we can slow down at this point. And when we talk about the rule of law generally, the rule of law, whether it is more or less valuable for some or for others, many citizens in Serbia feel that the rule of law actually exhibits double standards when you observe it from the standpoint of the European Union. Today in Parliament we had a precedent because somebody came here and said you entered somebody else's house in Kosovo and you got your just desserts. You know, this is something that has not been seen. Whether we're friends or not friends, when we talk about Kosovo and we're talking about, we have grown accustomed to such views because these are isolated views of representatives of the certain member countries of the European Union. This shows merely that the Albanians openly speak about the fact that their foreign policy is conducted by the United States of America, not Serbia is no factor. And this is something which pains us indeed, because we feel the European Union is a good partner for us on our path on European. This was not a good thing to hear today. This is the way we felt, the way we actually saw it as you supporting something which exists in Kosovo and Metohija, which is the position of some member states of the European Union, simply that this dialogue shouldn't even continue, that the state status quo should be supported, that the community or association Serbian community should not at all be formed. And this is painful for us. It is painful for us. You don't want by political dialogue to force to compel the Albanian side to implement the Brussels agreements, because we feel that we are embarking on this entire process of European integration in a friendly and brotherly way. When we talk about the conclusions that you make on the basis of some information, Greco is an expert group, mind you, which decided that there are 13 recommendations. Of these 13 recommendations, 7 were incorporated in the draft bill that we will have here in Serbia. 6 are part of constitutional amendments. We're working actively on this. Do you think it is easy for us to apply laws which speak about these recommendations that we already applied in the financial field? It is not simple, but we as a society are adapting to all this. where we have, you know, the MPs and prosecutors and judges. They are in the forefront when it comes to anti-corruption, when it comes to transparency. We do as much as you do. Let us not gain the impression that what the forthcoming elections are for you in the European Parliament is actually brings you to attack Serbia more in order to actually win more votes, because this is what Croatia did. This is what Croatia did. It was the easiest to attack Serbia without actually reflecting reality. No, I'm telling you how this impression, the impression that is gained, that is projected, no, this is your imagination. It is not my flight of fancy. When you look at the public opinion, this is what the people here feel. When they see how European institutions are behaving towards Serbia, they gain this impression. I'm talking about this as being an impression. So please give us your perception. How do you think we can really proceed faster on the way to European integration? Thank you.
Thank you all for the discussion. A last comment from the report, Mrs. Joksimovic. Reporter, Mrs. Joksimovic. Well, I try to follow the whole discussion. I'm not convinced that all the ministers in your countries would listen to something like this without being given a chance to answer, and I couldn't answer to many things that were said here, and I believe my role as a government representative here was to hear an answer. Anyway, I was happy to attend here, and I invite you to ask for a meeting with me, not just as a Minister for EU coordination and EPA coordinator, but as the national head negotiator. We have the head of the negotiating team, but politically I am the head negotiator. So I think it might be useful and nice if you were to ask for a meeting with me, and then I could ask with counter-examples to what you have to say. Being Minister for European integrations is not the issue of being popular. I don't want to be popular in Belgrade or in Brussels. Less popular I am in either capitals, I work better for the European future of Serbia. So thank you for your invitation. And I believe that next time you will have time to come and organize a meeting with me. In my keynote speech, I try to give you a picture of the main elements of our negotiating journey, and I invite you to visit me next time. We must certainly have an interesting discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Joksimovic. I thank everybody for the discussion. I thank the rapporteurs, the government's representatives, and the council's representatives. We move on to the point 4 of our agenda, chapters 23 and 24, including judiciary, constitutional reforms, basic rights, and the freedom of media and professionalism. First point, judiciary. We will hear the report of Mrs. Anderson and Mr. Jovanovic. Mrs. Anderson, please take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we know that this is a very important area, and we've had many discussions today already about judiciary and related issues, legal aid, constitutional reform. It's been touched on already today, and clearly it's a controversial area. And I did want to say that certainly it's something that's going to be focused on quite heavily in the European Parliament debate next month, in particular in terms of the reforms of the judiciary and the constitutional amendments and what has been happening with the Venice Commission. And I think we will, regardless of, I understand the feelings are high on this matter, but I think we will be looking closely at the detail of what comes out of the constitutional amendments process in terms of a fair system for selection of the judiciary and reform of the judiciary. It's perfectly well acknowledged by many of us, and I can assure you that this is nothing to do with MEPs wanting political advantage or making political points, that there is a long history of differences in democratic traditions on judicial appointments, on the constitution regarding the selection of judges, and everyone acknowledges that. There are many different standards across the world. Good governance isn't a single standard, and I think that point is very well made. But nevertheless, having said that, there are clear good practice around, well, certainly the International Bar Association, the way in which judges are selected, and how the lack of political interference in that can be guaranteed. And we had discussions with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice about that this morning, which were very useful. But I do think there's a lot of reassurance that has to be done on this, and I think many MEPs will make these points when we discuss it in the Parliament. And in the wider sense, there are other things that can be addressed, particularly around the training of judges, around diversity and selection of judges, so it's not just all, and we have a big problem in that about that in many countries, so it's not just the same people from the same backgrounds who are being selected as judges. So I think that's very important. And I also did want to touch on the legal aid issues, which will feature in our debate next month. And I'm afraid I didn't get a full answer from the Minister this morning on this when I questioned her about it, because I asked, obviously it's very good news that you've tabled the reform on legal aid, but I did ask specifically what safeguards there were to ensure that where there are key decisions on legal aid, that there is no political interference where it's a sensitive case. And again, other European countries have problems with this. Some countries don't actually have a proper functioning system of legal aid. Some countries do. So I think everyone understands that it's not the easiest thing to do, but nevertheless, it's a very important area to address. So just a few points there. There's a lot more that could be said, and hopefully other speakers will come in. But I mean, just to highlight finally, in terms of the legal aid situation, the Parliament's resolution for next month does underline the fact that you shouldn't be constrained in terms of who you can get free legal aid from, so that you're not directed towards just one provider, that there needs to be a range of choices of legal aid providers, and those providers need to have the confidence of the civil society system and the confidence of people in need. And just to hear, we did meet with NGOs as well today, and they did give quite a worrying picture about still the extent of inequality in Serbian society. Again, as in many other societies, that the distribution of wealth between rich and poor is still not in any way something to be necessarily proud of, and that some people are working, despite the economic growth, people are working for very low wages, and that they have, when they have a legal problem, when they have a discrimination, when they have some unfair treatment that is a breach of the law, it is very difficult for them to enforce their rights in practice. Therefore, this is something in line with Article 47 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. It's absolutely right that European Union law stands up for that. And so going back to the point about common principles and shared values, your President today told us that the reason that you want to join the EU is because that's the type of society that you want to belong to. And the detail on how the system works for the poorest and how people can enforce their rights in practice is absolutely critical on this, and I'm sure that you will share our views.
Hvala, gospođo Anderson. Reč ima gospodin Jovanović.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. Mr. Jovanović has the floor. I'm happy that some questions were touched upon that touched the judicial system and the judiciary in Serbia, considering the problems we inherited in the judiciary for decades, we have to point out several important questions which cannot be doubted. First, legislative procedure, when we talk about the laws regulating the judiciary, started with harmonizing our judiciary with the acquis. All judicial laws that were adopted here in Serbia are totally harmonized with the acquis. We had intensive public debate about these laws. Experts were involved heavily, as we are involving the experts and the academic expertise like the constitutional amendments. The Venice Commission did adopt a final opinion about the acceptability of the amendments. Another thing that we cannot challenge is that we have built a system of training judges and prosecutors, and this training, with the support of the European unions like GIZ, OSCE and USAID, is carried out. USAID is not a European institution, but they are supporting considerably the education of our judges and prosecutors. And when we work on improving the quality of the prosecutorial and the work of judges. When we speak about the judges, I have to point out one fact, which is important, and it was under the veil of a prejudice until now. Namely, linked to the prejudice due to the fact that our judges were elected politically, or that there was a lot of political influence in the process of the judicial elections. Just to remind you, the current High Judicial Councils, as well as the previous High Judicial Council, are made up of judges and prosecutors, the majority of judicial councils. Never the Assembly here turned down the proposals of the High Judicial Councils, where the majority of judges is actually sitting, for the candidates they proposed to hold judicial offices. It is indeed true that the Assembly voted the judges for their first term of office here in the House, but it was done exclusively upon the proposition, following the proposal of the High Judicial Council or the Prosecutorial Council. So their proposals were never turned down. So where do you see a political influence unless you read it into it? Of course, our government and our ministry are in agreement that mostly the Assembly should be excluded from the electoral process of the judicial officials. But then we can ask a question. Are we going to enter a paradox? Are we going to find ourselves in an absurd situation? The Venice Commission confirmed something as well, as good, which is our new amendments to the Constitution. When we elect the first next High Judicial Councils, who is going to elect the High Judicial Council? Judges? No. Prosecutors? No. We do not have an institution to elect the High Judicial Council. The Assembly has to do it, and the Assembly has to have an overseeing position, it has to exercise an overseeing position, not direct influence, not direct engagement with the work of the Judicial Council. And an attempt to answer the question which is linked with the proposals of the law on free legal aid, which as of tomorrow or the day after will be in the parliamentary pipeline procedure. I did not understand too well regarding the guarantees for the free legal aid and what is a possible connection there with political influence in the case of free legal aid. But what can be corroborated as true here is that the main pillar of the free legal aid, of those who provide free legal aid, is the lawyers' profession, the solicitors in Serbia. Solicitors are the part, legal practitioners are the part of the legal system. But our solicitors, we do not have barristers and solicitors, it's all one, but their trade, their expertise is the guarantee that the free legal aid will be offered in a proper, adequate way, in keeping with the law, without any influences and without any undue pressure. Considering that I myself, as a legal practitioner, I'm a solicitor, I know, I'm a lawyer, I know that lawyers fought to keep our own position in comparison to notaries public. You know, we didn't want to have our position devaluated by notary publics. We want to keep our independence. Therefore, the solicitors, trade lawyers are the basis and pillar of free legal aid.
Thank you very much. We will discuss now in this part of the session about constitutional reform. Mrs. Anderson, you have asked to take the floor related to constitutional reform. Would you like to take the advantage of the possibility of taking the floor now? Thank you. Mislim...
U redu, hvala vam najlepše. Reč ima gospođa Marjanović. Izvolite.
Zahvaljujem.
Thank you, and good evening to all of you, all MPs from the European Parliament and the National Assembly of Serbia. Obviously, the last item of the agenda, we spoke the most about chapters 23 and 24, as this is they cover an area which is most topical and most important and most vulnerable and most painful in the accession process of Serbia to the EU, which is why I asked to take the floor within this item of the agenda. I share this opinion and I would like to express my concern. Our colleagues of the EP, with much reason, spoke convincingly about good intentions on their part. Of course, it would be only normal that we should not underline this, but we have to do it sometimes. So I too will repeat, and my colleague Đurić, who is the only other person from the ranks of opposition, that the opposition also has good intentions, and that, as far as I'm concerned, it was never disputable in relation to Serbia's accession to the EU. We started this road, this process back in 1990. We are still on that path and ready to fight for it. What would be good, and that is not the case unfortunately, is that the parliamentary majority, which has a majority in this composition of the parliament and should nourish the consensus which exists in the parliament to send a message to the citizens. And we said how important it is to include our citizens in the process, and unless the parliament is sending such good, positive messages from this institution, from this building, then it will not be convincing enough. Since we have heard a lot about these topics, and I'm speaking about constitutional amendments, the position of independent impartial judiciary, freedom of expression in the media, the position and the role of the parliament, I would just like to add a few comments that have not been stated in the previous discussions. I would like to point to some new events related to the opinion of the Venice Commission and Greta opinions. In the last few days we heard on the news about the debate about these issues and statements given by some officials. I'm speaking about Greco and their representatives who expressed a dissatisfaction on the 13th recommendations of 7 have been abided by or met. And as for Venice Commission, a couple of days ago, as MPs, we were informed about the reaction of all relevant NGOs, meaning when I said relevant NGOs, they are part of the National Covenant for the accession to the EU, and which was that were praised in. And so the group of NGOs, together with professional associations of prosecutors and judges, expressed their doubt in the precision of the opinion of the Venice Commission, or in the way it was interpreted and conveyed by the Ministry of Justice. And they asked whether the memorandum of the Secretariat of the Venice Commission can have the same force, and was it adopted within the same procedure as it were the case if the Commission was took part in a regular procedure. And yes, I think this should be underlined, bearing in mind in the previous process of negotiation with civil society and professional association during the drafting of constitutional amendments. Well, that debate looked like a directed way, did not take into account the opinion of the professional associations. It was rejected, actually. Their opinions were, and then in June, confirmed the complaints and comments made by the professional associations and NGOs. So it would be good that representatives of the majority and of citizens and politicians, we should take into account and respect opinions presented here that are a product of our public hearings, and we should not wait for the international institutions and bodies to decide about this. We are wasting time and energy, and we are in a way pulling down the culture of consensus instead of nourishing that. As for the media, a lot has been said about it. In a situation when in Europe and throughout the world we have a dramatic deterioration of the position of journalists, even deaths and murders, I think it would be very important as again we have situations of murdering journalists. We're still not reducing the criteria when it comes to the values related to freedom of expression in the standards prescribed by the European Union conventions, and which have been accepted and ratified as in our systems. We talked about the media strategy. It is good that after a long period of dissatisfaction of representatives of the media and journalist associations, and the government reacted by bringing the whole procedure back to the starters, then it is now implemented under the auspices of the OC. So obviously we always have to wait for someone from outside to organize the process in a proper way. However, what is very important for us to know, media strategy was adopted in the previous years. It is necessary. It is very important for it to be good, but it cannot prejudge what will be the final legal texts, and there are no deadlines or timelines set which are clear enough or visible enough for us to be sure that today journalists, according to the laws in effect, are sufficiently protected. What we're afraid of is what will happen to the media media outlets that are closed, journalists that are threatened, until media strategy is done and adopted. So a few days ago we heard a statement of a high official of the intelligence agency who said that the greatest threat to Serbia are foreign agents active in the media, NGOs, and opposition parties. Starting from who gave this statement and what it sounds like for many of us who remember the old times when the situation for opposition and the journalists and in NGOs was more than dramatic. I would also underline that with amendments, when it comes to the draft of recommendations, was a sentence where we call on the representatives of and political officials and representatives of the state to take an active role in protecting the principle and the value of freedom of expression. We know, I'm not going to mention opposition or politicians, I'm talking about public figures, artists, writers, who once they express their criticism against the government are in a way prosecuted through the tabloids and are threatened in various ways. And there is this seems to be an automatic reaction of institutions and tabloids in an attempt to discredit such persons. And this is something that we should fight against. And the freedom of expression is primarily a question of freedom of the media and independence of the media. But it also means that each and every citizen has a right to such freedom, and that politicians in all situations, individual situations, must react to the violation of such freedoms and rights. And finally, let me say a few words about the Parliament. I will quote Article 2 of, not all of it, of the Constitutional Republic of Serbia, which says, as in that the sovereignty comes from the citizens, and that not a single state, body, political organization, group, or individual cannot take to its sovereignty from the citizen, nor establish any kind of power without explicit and free will of the people. So, majority, but also minority has been elected by citizens. So, the right to represent citizens in the work of the Parliament, the political minorities do not have the same conditions, or their right has been reduced much compared to the rights to represent their voters in the Parliament. So, for example, I will give you an example and a fact which I collected from our internal records and archives. For 2 years of this composition of the Parliament, of 67 sanctions pronounced, 59 were directed towards the members of the opposition. Only 2 sanctions were pronounced for members of the majority. So if we were to deal why are they sanctioned, why are they punished, that would be very interesting and would call for a special analysis, because frequently members of the opposition are warned that they cannot criticize ministers or the government. And I would like to conclude by expressing my statement and an assessment. In the past we said that this committee was composed of MPs, so we are here doing an oversight as parliamentarians, overseeing the accession process carried out by the government and agency. They do the technical part of work. We're here politicians, and we cannot be happy with by accepting formal things. Today we try to open a serious dialogue It was actually an attempt to fight with formed against the essence and to apply administrative force to fight the law and to insult one another and to fight it instead of using arguments. And this is the manure and a habit that has taken over this parliament, and I hope that this will be changed together with the accession process of Serbia to the EU. I believe that without strengthening the institution of the parliament, which has been weakened in all its functions, we cannot speak about the rule of law nor about independent judiciary or freedom of expression. Thank you.
Hvala vama, gospođo Marjanović.
Thank you, Madam Marjanović. This discussion not only in terms of the choice of topics, but also in terms of its duration, shows what our attitude is towards this particular House. Madam Kovac, thank you. As I said in my previous intervention, I ask for the floor mainly to speak on chapter 23, and I'm glad that we function in this way because this is a voluminous chapter, so I'm glad that we have these topics divided in this way. We talk about fundamental rights and the rights of national minority, although this topic has been touched upon a number of times in the statement of the distinguished Madam Minister and in the statement of the opposition MP. It is a fact, and this is what we talked about last time when we met in Strasbourg, that this summer, more precisely on the 20th of June this year, at the 7th extraordinary session of the Assembly, a package of long-expected, long-awaited laws was adopted, framework laws on the rights and protection of national minorities and on the amendments to the law, national councils of national minorities, the official use of language, registers, etc. Let me just say a few things about the substance of how these laws were enacted, passed, and on the other hand, why we were so late in their adoption, because we have to speak about that openly. It is a fact that action plans for chapters 23 and 24 were very ambitious. That is a fact, and it is also a fact that we are now undertaking the revision, which should finish by the end of this year. And we were late 2 or 3 years in adopting some laws, but as regards this package, it was really adopted as part of a huge inclusive process, or in a process which was inclusive, Everybody could state their views, and Serbia is a rare example where you have a council for Nicola minority headed by the Prime Minister herself, in the work of which different ministers participate, as well as representatives of national councils and their representatives. So when we reach the final stage, prior to the very adoption of this law, the Ministry for State Administration and Local Administration was open to accepting specific amendments to clarify specific issues so as not to have laws which are good only on paper, but we wanted to have a proper legislative and constitutional framework for the protection of minorities, but also those which would be implementable in the field. On the other hand, I could go on for hours, but I'll try to be succinct. On the other hand, we have the action plan for national minorities, and I have to commend, first of all, the Office for Human and Minority Rights, because they are producing regular reports. Now the 8th report is being drawn up. This is a quarterly report. Every time the presentation of this report is transparent, different state institutions, NGOs are invited, as well as national councils of national minorities. And let me not be just commending this as somebody who is from the opposition. There are 111 activities in the action plan. I do not agree that this kind of reporting in quantitative ways is always the best solution, but it is true that the implementation of this action plan, has been implemented 90%. Let me say a few words about those activities which have not been implemented or on which no report exists. Let me just say that we are aware of this fact. I'm talking about the government of the Republic of Serbia. But I want to seek assistance and to explain why this is important. Often we are criticized, we have to be frank, by Croatia as well as by other countries. So they criticize us because in respect of the political participation of members of national minorities, because we have the so-called natural threshold in Serbia for national minorities, which suits only those who have larger numbers, and we have not secured the proper representation of those whose numbers are smaller. The Republic of Serbia has undertaken to draw up comparative legal analysis, how this stands in other countries, to see how this stands in other countries, on which basis the government shall be given a report, and this analysis shall be submitted to the National Assembly, on the basis of which we shall undertake further steps. This is one of the activities which is still pending. There have been no specific proposals, but we are aware of the fact that we have to address this issue. I believe it would be best to remain for the solution, the arrangement for the larger national minorities to remain, but to address the issue of the smaller ones. We also need to renew the work of bilateral commissions for minorities. Some exist, but the work of some has been suspended or is at a standstill. Somehow it is not functioning. There are some other questions here, but I do not wish to be too expansive. Let me try to answer some recent or to address some recent developments. The law on national councils of national minorities, as I mentioned, has been changed. Elections have been called. Serbia is a shining example, if I can say so, where elections are being organized for 22 national minorities. 18 shall elect their national councils through direct and the rest through the electoral system. It was not easy to organize and to revise the voters' roster, the electoral rolls. This is something that is in my area of interest. It is not an ideal roster. Whether there have been abuses, well, it is the constitutional right of each person not to state their views, but they are also entitled to freely stating their views as members of a political minority, of a specific minority. But as this is a political struggle, there have been some lists which were perhaps at issue, but I am sure that the people in charge will seek for them to be improved. I don't want these pieces of criticism to actually undermine the entire system, because the framework is indeed good. What happens in the field, that needs to be investigated as to whether these are political abuses. For instance, the possibility for a specific party, which is not a national minority party, to be registered as a national majority party and thereby reach the so-called natural threshold of some 18 or 15,000 voters, and then enter parliament as a representative of the Slovaks, whereas it is not really so. I have also to laud the efforts of or rather there is a budgetary fund and resources from the Republican budget which are allocated for the work of national minorities councils. But the budgetary fund has been increased some 20 times, which is good. We hope that in the future there will be more money found for this national fund to be indeed operational, for the amount to be equal to the amount which is allocated for the work of national councils, of which there are many. As the topic are fundamental rights, let me say a few other things. It has been mentioned that the law on free legal aid has been adopted. The lady minister said that it has been adopted by the government and that it will be discussed at tomorrow's session of the government. It is good that this has happened at long last, because we've been waiting for many years for this piece of legislation, as well as for the law on the protection of personal data. This is a major development, and I believe that this, if it is not too late, will be positively assessed in the anticipated non-paper, which is expected in November. And another fact that nobody is escaping from is the obligation to adopt a law on missing babies. The Republic has undertaken this obligation. We are aware of this. This is within Chapter 23. These are fundamental rights. Several ministries, health, social welfare, etc., they have set up a task force, a working group, have proposed several versions of this legislation that have been in the Assembly. Now we have yet another version. I regret the fact that it won't be on the agenda of our next session, but I hope that it will be resolved soon. And the reasons for the delay is that common grounds, common language is sought with the parents by way of inclusion, because we want to adopt a law which will not sit well with all involved, which will not be discriminatory. And the Ministry of Justice, as in charge of this law, is prepared to have it adopted as soon as possible. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Kukan, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, only sentences, because Elvira was speaking about the national minorities and the Council. Distinguished colleague of mine from the European Parliament, Andrei Kovachev, asked me to present this issue here, that in connection with the election to the Council of National Minorities, Bulgarian national minority feels the unacceptable political pressure from SNS concerning the behavior and the process of elections. Tomorrow I will give you the name of the two towns. I just wanted to mention it because from our point of view this is simply unacceptable. Thank you.
Hvala, gospodine Kukan.
Thank you, Mr. Kukan. A technical remark. SNS is not participating in these elections, and currently we have two rosters reported by the Bulgarian national minority, as far as I know, so that freedom of choice has been fully provided for. Madam Fayon has the floor now.
Hvala vam, gospođo.
No, Madam Fayon, thank you. Mr. Rističević.
Dame I gospodo.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a person who has been since 1988 an opponent of the regime of Slobodan Milošević, as a person who has been an anti-communist, as a person, as one who is accustomed to fight for freedom, as an agriculturist, a farmer owning 23 hectares of land, as someone who has been elected to this assembly as an MP, I have to say something about the freedom of the media, because through these processes I went alone from 1988 to this date, much has changed. The media strategy, which I hope will be produced, will first and foremost be the product of the work of journalists' associations. But I have to say in this introductory part that irrespective of the fact that certain Slovenian or European MEPs from Slovenia are asseverating, claiming that Kosovo and Metohija is not our house, I still, after all, share the opinion of those 5 European countries who do not think so. It is our house, irrespective of the dissolution of Yugoslavia. This house is also a house of Slovenian representatives. When they come here, they can see that we are an exceptionally tolerant people. They can see Prince Kocelj and our king as a symbol of the joint country which has been in existence since 1918. That's by way of such tolerance. I do not believe that any people or any parliament would have left a monument, for instance, to Karađorđe in some other countries. So in Croatia, for instance, in the Croatian parliament, they chucked out Josip Broz from their official governmental and other official premises. In that connection, I'm proud of the level, the degree of tolerance exhibited by people. So democracy, as far as I can see, or rather my impression is that there are attempts at imposing democracy. Democracy is not an import product that you can import. This is a serious, complex, and product which takes much time to make. So any kind of democracy that would be imposed would be short-lived. And I believe that it should grow from within. It is ruled by the majority. It is counting votes in a way, but still it is the conflict of different opinions, and the adversary should not be seen as an enemy. I do not see the MEPs as either enemies or certainly not as adversaries. I feel that some of them do not have the same opinion. It is up to me to convince them that the freedom of the media in Serbia is at an impressive level. It is not the freedom of the media that is that issue in Serbia. It is the quality of the information. I think that the media are too free. The market is small. There is too much press and too many media. And in this fight for the market, what suffers is quality. I am not an owner. I do not own any cable system or what have you. A politician who owns a cable system. I am not a mayor who owns daily. I am not an owner of several media outlets, and nor am I the owner of a firm which, dealing in advertisements, earns 100 million euros. And perhaps this too is a reason for the lack of objectivity in respect of quality. I can try to be objective as far as I can, sitting where I am. Has anyone in this conference hall been a victim? You are all talking about freedom of the media, the alleged pressure exerted by politicians on journalists. But we have an opposite situation as well. We have pressures exerted by journalists on politicians. In addition to all that I have said, I myself have been targeted very often. Not a single MP has this kind of reputation. What singles out Rističević is his evil. Rističević has hit rock bottom. Scum, Rističević. Get the laws out of political disgrace. Shame for Serbia. Marijan Rističević is a homo. This scum is eating assembly bread without work, and this is the spitting image of the progressive government, political clown and rapist or bully. Rističević has actually taken money from the state, etc., etc. and owes millions. I can show you that I owe nothing. Surprise in the assembly. Rističević is private enterprises and firms. Marian Rističević has raped. Rističević wants to kill chinchilla, the chinchilla furry animals. The wife of the MP is trying to something at all costs. Rističević has private companies. This director is associated with me, and I don't know what and what have you not, etc., etc. MP is suing Nin and Danica Popovic. Her comment to that was "fui." And we were called, Mr. Olic and I myself were called scarecrows by a journalist. Marian Ristić wants to kill the poor chinchillas. Lucrative business of Marian Rističević, fraud of Marian Rističević and his wife. Marian Rističević has been given subsidies. I don't know what a farmer should get if not subsidies. I am a farmer. So what I'm telling you, not the opposition media, and I should like to give all these for their inspections to the MEPs to see all these documents, all these media clips. So as a person who is in a way the victim of the media, I've given them full freedom. I also have two judgments. The lawsuit lasted for 4 years. I was given 20,000 dinars. That was the cost of my mental anguish. If you tell untruths about somebody, this is finished in a year, and the awarded damages are to the tune of 300,000 or more. So if you are an official who has amassed riches, their mental anguish costs more probably than mine. And this is according to the rule of law, which is not always in keeping with what the European Union would want or what we would want. Namely, in Serbia, nothing is forbidden to the media. The most complaints are from those people who were censuring Serbia the most. In 2002, let me remind you, the journalist Milan Pantic was killed, and it still remains unsolved. I want this murder to be solved. But the new government, thanks to the fact that they put journalists in a commission to clarify the murder of Churuvia, they managed to do something. I condemn all pressures on the media and on journalists, but this also happens in the European Union. In this year, you had 4 murders of journalists in the EU, in Slovakia, in Bulgaria, in Sweden. Also happened. This also happens in these countries, which I also condemn. It goes without saying. I believe that the problem with the journalists will continue. This capital has its own rules, and the owners of not only media but also of companies which advertise in the media ask the media to do things which are not in keeping with media freedom. But the government cannot do much about that, because if you write something very bad about me, and if you're an investigating journalist investigating me, if I was given 15 tons of sugar from the government at a specific price, if I kept both the sugar and the money, and if I advertise in your media and you publish it, I will no longer be advertising in your paper. So I'm talking about the way that we or somebody else could affect or influence the media. The issue of the freedom of the media will continue to be topical. I believe that it is much more important to build the country than to rule the country. So I believe that the situation will improve when the water clarifies and the sludge gets to the bottom. The situation is similar elsewhere, and it was such in the United States of America. I'm sure that it will improve in Serbia. I'm sure that the MEPs share my view that we need to build our country, to improve our economy, to incorporate the necessary rules, and then if you want us in, okay, that is up to you, that is a matter of your will. We want to abide by these standards, but let's see what happens. Just as a good head of a family in the country wants all the best for his family, this is what we want for our country. It is upon us to work, to strive to achieve our desired aim. 1,000-mile trip starts with the first step, and we are certain that we have taken quite a few steps. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rističević, for a picturesque review of the media content, which also demonstrates the level of media freedom as well as some other things. We have Mr. Đurić who wishes to speak at this point, but after all these discussions, does anyone else wish to speak? If not, Madam Fajon.
I didn't react before, though this is a topic I asked for the floor in the first place, and it's very close to my heart, being myself a former journalist too. I mean, for what I want to say first, it's not a question about being in the EU or outside of the EU, but when we discuss media freedom, it's simply necessary for democratic societies, and that is what we have to understand. When it comes to freedom of expression and media freedom, in Serbia, unfortunately, and that is also written in the report of the Commission, also the Parliament, it is a worrying no progress trend. And if we listen to the civil society, it's even backsliding trend, because we still have reported attacks on and intimidation of journalists that remain a concern, and dwindling rankings, what I mentioned before, of different international organizations that are putting media freedom in Serbia quite down on the scale. For example, in last year, I think Serbia fell 10 places down compared to ranking a year before. We still have telling figures of attacks, threat and pressure. Again, I'm just reminding us on the statistics that is provided by international organization. By October this year, the number of incidents had soared to 37, which is very worrying trend, and needless to say that pressure, including harassment by tax inspectors, can be an effective way to encourage self-censorship. Today we heard also in several discussions the worrying trend that it's not clear the transparency of the ownership of the media, and the negotiations with the media coalition is very difficult, and it's not sure what will happen next. Will they stay part of the talks with the government, and what we can expect from the media strategy? There were some positive developments, but certainly it's not enough when we look what is happening in reality in the media. So it is important challenge for Serbia, work on all new media strategy which should create a framework for media pluralism, and the quality of the dialogue with the authorities has somewhat improved, but it should become much more inclusive. The media coalition, to my understanding, remains very skeptical and underlines that regardless of the quality of the final document, it will be all about the implementation. And furthermore, in the case of the previous media strategy, 3 years elapsed between the publication of the document and the adoption of relevant laws in the Parliament. And this is something that is also worth to mention. I would like maybe to ask you, someone can comment, the open letter to the international community from the Media Coalition dated on the 22nd of October. They published an open letter to the international community which describes in detail the very difficult, we could say dramatic situation in the media. And very frequent humiliation of journalists and other media workers by representatives of the government, supposed to be happening, who label them as enemies of the society or foreign agents, and the letter specifically mentions the case of Nedim Sejdinovic. So maybe this is something you can comment. It's the letter we all seen, and these are of course a worrying trend. So I would just wish to see that there would be a further progress in that regard. I believe that more and better consultation and cooperation with all relevant media stakeholders has to be established if better media environment is to be created. And the same goes for different independent regulatory bodies, what I mentioned already before, including Ombudsman's person, the Anti-Corruption Agency, the National Audit Authority, and the Commissioner for Information of Public Importance and Personal Data Protection. So, yeah, that would be what I wanted to say.
Hvala. Thank you. In order to have better time management, I would suggest the following. I have the agreement of Mr. Tang regarding his time. If we can now open the next point, talk about the economic development, and then once you talk about the economic development, you can comment the media. Mr. Tang is agreed. Mr. Juric, are you in agreement? Yes, you are. Excellent. Mr. Tang, please, do you have the floor?
Thank you, Chair, and I think it was excellent put by Ms. Fajon, and I will not spend too much time on media freedom. Also, but let me say that, of course, media freedom is also in a new era, also a bit of a struggle for all of us. If you look at the social media, you were discussing the quality of media. It's also stretches out to the quality of the social media, and there we have the same problem. We don't know who finances, we don't know who's behind messages, advertisements, and there we have a common problem on how to make sure that social media is not used for political objectives or is as transparent as the normal media are or should be. Let me just stick there. On economy, of course, there's been impressive progress, I can say, and I'm very pleased to see that Serbia has left the program, the adjustment program, under the auspices of the IMF, but also entered a different agreement with the IMF, which I think is very wise to seek the advice of the IMF and to give and show which is the way forward. And indeed, the current results are good, and that's good to see. And of course, what I also heard today is that people are not just satisfied with the current results today, but also want to invest in good results in the future. And I think this is the right attitude that I would like to see. Of course, the IMF also points out that there's still a large part of the economy which is taken up by state-owned enterprises, which require attention, which is difficult to change now and then. The experience learns. For example, non-performing loans are on state-owned banks, and state-owned enterprises require really clear direction from the executive and also from Parliament on how these companies should operate. Very clear conditions on how they operate. But IMF also warns that. Let me take two remarks on what I find striking. I see that there is a lot of foreign direct investment, and in itself that's good news, because this allows the Serbian economy to benefit from high productive production methods, allows Serbia to learn state-of-the-art techniques. But there's also a downside which you find not in good times, but in bad times. If you rely too much on foreign direct investments, you will see, especially when there's a downturn, that the first that dries up is foreign direct investment. And I think what you want to achieve is also to have more homegrown economic growth. And also your Prime Minister, I heard, says she wants to focus more on SMEs, and I think that's indeed also a right approach. You want to make it homegrown economic growth, not too dependent on foreign direct investment, especially not by the large corporates, because this is very mobile and very capital and can disrupt an economy in bad times. So you should make sure We have seen it in the 2008 crisis that the countries which had a huge foreign involvement in the financial sector were hit pretty hard. This is some of the countries were more say foreign-owned financial sector, and that the capital dried up very quickly. We should keep that in mind. The other concern is, which I'm not clear about, is of course that there are still, at least at a regional level, sometimes a high unemployment, but also a large shadow economy. This is a part of the economy which is usually low productive, and I'm still unclear how the policy is going to change this. It's a surprisingly large chunk of the economy. I think changing this from informal to a formal economy allows a huge improvement, and then again it might not be that easy to do, how to make informal formal, how to incentivize people to come to the formal economy. That's part of the problem. And I'm not clear on the policy that there is right now, but I think it's crucial also for the further development, to strengthen economic growth. I would like to see that the SMEs get a better position in the Serbian economy, so that the economy is, the growth is homegrown, but also to make the shadow economy, to restrict in a sense the shadow economy and see this transformation from informal to formal economy. But overall I would say enjoy the good times, so to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Đurić, who asked for the floor. Thank you. First, to go back to chapter 23 and media freedom and the rule of law, previous point, very briefly. We've heard here that Venice Commission gave green light to our constitutional amendments. Unfortunately, I have to draw your attention to a communiqué by the organizations here, Association of our prosecutors, Center for Human Rights, legal associations, European Movement in Serbia, and Serbia Transparency, which is the branch of Transparency International. And they said that the ministry didn't even petition Venice Commission. The members of the Venice Commission didn't vote on anything. The ministry addressed the secretariat of the commission, which is the working body. The secretariat gave a positive attitude, but they've addressed the secretariat in order to avoid the commission debate the quality of the amendments. I'm not involved in this, I'm not a lawyer, but I think this needs closer attention. As far as media are concerned, and media freedoms, Mrs. Fine talked about the demands of the media coalition. There are 13 of them. They've sent a letter to the international community. For me, it's particularly interesting, for instance, the request to have the regulations for the project financing of media. When you see which medias are financed, when they were set up, to whom they belong, what references do they have, what projects they compete with, you can clearly see from, miles away how money is channeled to some medias which are mothered by the state, and the others are just the stepchildren. You have medias whose taxes debts are cancelled, and you have medias whose are financed, who are combed by tax police for 6 months, and they say, show us the contract with Google. We want to see your paper contract with Google. How did you make a contract with Google? We said, we press the button. We do not have a paper, and then insist on a paper. So this is very selective. Going back to the economy, we can be very happy, both on the position and the opposition, but the challenge is how to keep the budget in the next 5 years in the fiscal balance in order to reduce the fiscal risk, and what is more important, inside the growth, we are consolidated fiscally, but the tax consolidation is not the result of the reforms and savings, but is the result of the increase of public spending. Such fiscal consolidation is usually difficult to maintain longer run. And we had several foreign favorable factors, like the reducing of petrol prices, international money became cheaper, and then the Eurozone recovered. So sustainability can be a problem. Our credit ratings are still in the domain of speculation and dangerous. When you look at the economic growth, we are comparing with 2017, which was a very bad year. It was a draft year, which hit the agriculture a lot, and agriculture contributes 12 to 15% to our GDP. If we do not look at that, or we do not add out all that up, we have some 3% of growth, and we need 7 to 9% of growth to have a viable growth. IMF, as reports by our tax council, IMF estimates our growth next year to only 3.5%. Fortunately, we are going to have budget surplus on the current account, so with a small budget deficit in 2019, we might support the economic growth. I will say how we could do it, and what is even more important, we can improve the structures of public finance. In order to support economic growth, we could have an excellent measure instead of selective subsidies, which is the base of our economic growth. We could do one brilliant non-selective subsidy of the entire economy if we reduce the income tax and revenue tax. And of course, we need massive public investment. Environment protection might be an excellent option for that. Also, what we are looking at in the improvement of public finances is the education, health, tax administration, public companies, local administration budgets. All this needs regulating. There's lots of delays in local administration budgets, and we have inherited a very bad system of incomes in the public sector where we have very small scope of incomes, and the experts, people with knowledge, are demotivated, they're leaving the public domain, and we are always short of experts. And we have this ban on employment of public sector, which really needs to be revised in order to compensate for this deficit in public sector. What, in my view, is good, what we can be very proud of, it is not influencing a lot the GDP, it's only 7.3% of the GDP, is one genuine Serbian self-developed IT industry in Serbia, which we can really be proud of and which we can bring into the European family. When the entrepreneurs, homegrown entrepreneurs, have the opportunity to work independently without too much interference by the state, we can still hope that our IT, which is catching up with agriculture without exports, can contribute to the future growth of Serbian economy. That's all that I want to say. Thank you very much. Thank you. Two short technical remarks. The memo of the Secretariat of the Venice Commission, we had information today. We heard that the Commission was informed about the memorandum before it was sent, and I think it is on the official site of the Commission, and the tabloid media are still very much active, as Mr. Rističević, the media that Mr. Rističević mentioned. Mrs. Tomić.
Thank you very much. When it comes to economic development, in the case of Serbia, I believe that the current trends for 2018, what are the achievements? We have achieved a high rate of economic growth. For the first half of this, 2018 is 4.9%, which is a huge difference as compared to 2012 when it was minus 3.6%. We have balanced public finances, reduction of public debt, and low and stable inflation. So all these indicators show that Serbia is not among only the leaders, but it is experiencing an economic boom, which all international financial organizations have said so. Among the 15 countries when it comes to the attraction of foreign direct investments, that it's number one, and according to the World Bank Human Capital Index is 27 of 157. The loan or credit rating is B plus level, which is a huge and rapid jump forward. And what is very important is to say that unemployment rate has reduced by 50%. It's 11.19%. And there's been an increase of employment in the private sector to 6%, whereas the drop has gone to 1.4% in the public sector. So these are all data that of IMF. Inflation is 2.1% compared to last year, and the public debt of Serbia is on the drop, significant drop. It would be 54%. So of the 14 negotiating chapters, 3 are related to the economy. 5 are in the area of the Ministry of the Economy, and 3 are within the competence of Ministry of Finance, plus 2 are related, and it is within the competence of the National Bank of Serbia. So there is a subcommittee for economic and financial issues, and of the 7 committees established on the 4th of March 2014, the last meeting was held on the 18th of January 2017, and beginning of November, on the 7th of November, we will have a meeting of the subcommittee in Brussels, which will give us an overall picture of what has been achieved over the last year. Economic situation, politics, and market economy, strengthening of the competition are the main topics. Internal and external audit and statistics. The Special Working Group for the Reform of Public Administration shows that we had the last meeting on the 28th and the 29th of May, and the Parliament is one of the parties to this proceedings or in this activity, and Committee for the Finances shall carry out a public hearing together with the state audit institution, with the presence of the media. We had already a public hearing with the participation of the public auditors, and 2 in 2018 in Subotica and Leskovac. So the program of economic reform show a medium-term framework that the European Commission is receiving from the government. Today we had a meeting in the Ministry of Finance, where we should give a final report for 2017 that the European Commission will adopt, which includes the opinion of the NGOs, apart from all other state bodies, of public associations, business community, the a standing conference of local self-governments. And so the program of economic reforms has gone through 4 cycles, and it is going through 9 main or key fields. So the government plans, as when it comes to this group, which is composed of all stakeholders, to make a list of structural reforms for 2019 until the 2021. And after we adopt the budget for 2019, we will establish the expenditure of this kind of a reform. And it's very important whether they do it together with the European Union or the European Commission, and that the Council of the European Union will adopt this new plan of economic reforms until the year 2021. And it is important the last document, which was dealt with in May 2018, it's put up on the website, so all European MPs can take a look at it. The National Assembly has been active in the work of the working group for reporting related to all these programs, including the strengthening of public parliamentary oversight of public finances and the state audit that takes also part in the working group, and that is one of the very important pillars of the external control or oversight, apart from the portal and the government office, which are mechanisms or tools that needs to be used by the National Assembly in carrying out its oversight. So not only do macroeconomic indicators show what has been achieved and how Serbia progressed step by step, but the parliament, in cooperation with local self-governments, established the way of informing the public on the expenditures and how money of taxpayers is spent in Serbia. So in cooperation with media, local governments are informed about the way we work. Republican parliament might not be recognized by the public when it comes to some kind of overseeing or controlling public finances. And this is why this program, in cooperation with the European Union, is helpful for us to make the awareness of citizens be at a satisfying level. Thank you, Mrs. Stojkovic. Dear co-chair, Mr. Cook, Mr. Orlic, dear MPs, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to have this opportunity to present the results of the Serbian government when it comes to economy and economic development of the Republic of Serbia. Serbia is marking nowadays very good results. Every day we are achieving goals and we're scoring on a daily basis in economic development. So many international organizations that are monitoring the work of Serbia in the area of economy. Serbia has jumped 5 places when it comes to global competition of the World Economic Forum for 2018, and we are on 65th place of 140 ranked countries. So we are ahead of all ex-Yugoslav countries except for Slovenia. So we are before Montenegro, Croatia, which is member of the EU, Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Serbia has marked victories when it comes to the economy, but we are continuing to develop our projects and plans. We are reducing fiscal burden on the salaries, our wages, and starting January 1st, I can tell you that starting January 1st, 2019, there will be no more contributions by 0.70%, and fiscal burdens for the employers will be reduced. The government and the National Assembly, which adopts reform legislation, will make our market more attractive, and our country will continue attracting domestic and foreign investors, which will reduce the unemployment rate, opening of new plants, factories, new jobs, which will ensure further development trend of the Serbian economy. Active measures. Well, what I read, our joint declaration, which is part of the materials which we received of our committee, It speaks about the fact that we have to go on to continue the reform of the tax system or tax administration. The government is applying active measures towards tax incentives, and starting October the 1st will be directed towards young entrepreneurs who have graduated from university over the last 6 months, where the labor market will have incentives to open their companies and they will be exempt from taxes and contributions for themselves and for the first 9 employees in the startup companies. So this is just an example of concrete measures of our policies which will lead us to good results. My colleague Tomic presented all the numbers and indicators related to IT and overall situation of development of the Republic of Serbia. GDP in the first 6 months is 4.8%, the annual level that has contributed to the increase of GDP. Was contributed by construction, industry, economy, direct foreign investments in the first 6 months of 2018 have been on the rise. It's 1.4 billion euros. The Republic of Serbia is the leader in Southeast Europe according to the number of foreign FDIs, and the public debt was 61.4%. Now it's below 60%. It is 59.5% of the GDP. It reduced the unemployment rate. We have inherited a high unemployment rate, over 20%. In the first 8 months of 2018, that rate is 11.9%, which is still a high rate of unemployment. But we will apply active measures of economic policy and fight to reduce unemployment rate. EU is one of the most important foreign trade partners with 64% in the total exchange or trade with international trade. So in the first 8 months in this year was 60%, whereas 62.3% of the total imports comes from member states of the EU, and we will continue to reduce the unemployment rate and to improve and to make same conditions for foreign and national investments. We have very ambitious plans when it comes to the continuation of reform processes in the forthcoming period, and we will continue to have victories when it comes to collective sports, such as volleyball and basketball. We will translate success to the economic field, and we will have a very ambitious budget for 2019, and we will continue maintaining the very high level of growth. And Ministry, as I said, the Ministry of Finance will have come up with new tax investments and reduction of contributions, particularly for the IT sector, because we want the IT sector to be more attractive for investments, because in 2017 it was the IT sector which recorded over €1 billion of revenue. Digitalization is one of the priorities of this government, and the Republic of Serbia offered organization of Digital Summit, which should happen in 2019. One of the benefits of the Berlin process and the last London summit speaks in favor of the importance of digital agenda, which will support innovation, inclusion and modernization of Serbian society. And in conclusion, I would like to give some observation given by my colleague from Sweden, Mr. Hockman, who inspired me to conclude my presentation today when he said that often investments 8 to 9 come from the EU countries and that we are directed towards each other, that we belong to each other, and we're aware of the tasks that we're looking at. We have 35 chapters and 35 steps towards the full membership in the EU. And I hope, dear colleague Hockman, that soon in 2025 we'll bear the fruits or pick the fruits that our citizens and our economy will feel the benefits when it comes to increase of standard of living and quality of life in my country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have another speaker who wishes the floor. And Madam Filipovsky also wants to join in the discussion. Mr. Hockmark. Mr. Rističević.
Zahvaljujem. Dame I gospodo narodni.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, MPs. I'm glad that agriculture has contributed to the growth of the GDP this year, in which way we compensated for what the drought took away from us last year. I'm glad also because of what I said about the media, because the richer the country, the more the resources for them too. And just let me tell you that no journalist who wrote what I showed you before has been sanctioned in any way whatsoever. What I'm saying is there are pressures on the media, but they are rather pressures of the opposition who wanted to extinguish a number of media outlets according to the 2006 recipe, when the police actually occupied BK television and when they also took Kurir, its name is Kurir, daily media outlet. So these are the people who want us to forbid several media. I agree with what Madam Fayon has said. There are pressures on the media, but if we reacted as the government, as the authorities, that would mean that we were violating the right of the opposition to criticism. We have an anchor woman of Daily News. She had a press conference which she held because she was hurt, but she sent away other colleagues, journalists, because in her book these were not proper journalists. So, although they did have their proper journalistic IDs, I'm just complementing my previous statement, so that such pressures do exist, but they're mainly from the other side. As regards the economy, I believe that next year we should be making further progress. I could bet the GDP will be above 4.2%. My forecast is that the GDP's growth, thanks to agriculture, this year will be 4.4%, which is a sound figure because the growth is based on manufacturing industries. It is not based only on trade. You take a credit, you take somebody else's money, you buy commodities with somebody else's money, and then in the end you can show a growth rate which is not based on what it should be based on. There will be more money for farming. I don't believe in the future agriculture shall account for 14%. I believe that it will account for increasingly less of the GDP, and that thanks to the manufacturing industry and to some other activities, the GDP will grow. Agriculture shall be worth much more, but in terms of its share in the GDP, it will be smaller. I'm glad to see that there will be more money for incentives. I should like to thank the EU for the money sent us from EFART in 2015. And this was something which really was a source of joy for a number of farmers. I hope that in the next period we shall utilize the 184 million euros which we expect to get. I think that the country will make economic progress. I'm not glad because Montenegro and Croatia are stagnating. They're actually not keeping abreast of Serbia's progress. I wish everybody to be in a better economic situation because that would mean more trade, more production, and improved standard of our own citizens. I'm glad to see that the rate of exchange has been stable for some 6 years. Inflation is around 1%. We have a surplus in the budget, which we didn't have in previous years. I'm glad to see that too. I'm very happy because our import coverage by exports is much higher than in previous years. If it falls because we are importing new technologies, new machines, new equipment, thanks to which we shall have better businesses in the future. Yeah, I'm glad to see a high volume of trade with the European Union, 66%, much more than with Russia. I'm also glad that we are trading with Russia. I'm glad that the Chinese are investing so much. They are a major force, economically speaking. I'm glad to see that we will be improving the standard of our citizens by the day, and that in terms of quality of life, we will reach some countries which are EU members, which are in this region. We are now leaving behind the situation when all Serbs wanted just to reap and nobody wanted to sow. So in this period, we have planted our plants, and it is bearing fruit now for the first time. I believe that this will only increase. My advice is for everybody to be patient and to actually wait for the fruit to be born, the fruit of the trees that we have planted. I'm also suggesting to the opposition to wait for those fruits because they will be able to reap the fruits of our efforts for the benefit of the people. So in terms of economy, I am an optimist. As regards the media that I already talked about, I'm not an optimist. And so I should repeat to our colleagues from the European Parliament, pressures on the media are exerted the least by the government. They are exerted the most by other people, the other side, who own different TV channels, cable networks, what have you, and politicians who own such networks, mind you, which I don't think is at all appropriate. I hope that in the future we will have the media that we want to have and that our colleagues from the EU want us to have. Thank you. Madam Filipovski, up to 2 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the sake of full information to be imparted on the situation in the media, I should like to say a few words about this item on the agenda, namely that the new law on the media, the new law on information, has actually taken the state of the Serbia out of media outlets. They have been fully privatized, so that as far as transparency is concerned, there is a register of media where data is kept on the ownership structure of the different media, as well as data on all the revenues of media from public resources. I also have to say that the protagonists of political life currently in Serbia, who used to be in power, who actually were the protagonists of the harshest censorship of media when I was in the opposition from 2008 to 2012, now they're asking for the media to be extinguish, those with the highest circulation, for their editors to be arrested. They are asking for frequencies to be taken from some media. And some political parties actually who hold press conferences receive some and chuck out other journalists from such press conferences. So I believe and hope that this situation in Serbia will improve, that we shall all realize that we are actually all losers because of that, and that by implementing the media strategy, there will be a calming of all these passions. Thank you. Mr. Hochmark, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think regarding media, it is not only the formal issues, the legislation as such, but also how things work in reality. In that perspective, I think it's important, media shall not be seen as neither a friend nor an enemy. It's an independent institution. In the long term, we have to live that with the fact that they are criticizing politicians as well as those who are in government, because that's the idea of free and independent media. But I had to respond to the fact that I had inspired a colleague here. And I think it is the logic of the increase of investments and trade. It's important to understand that. That is because we are getting closer by legislative changes. The prospect of becoming a member is important, but the development and the unifying legislation is a crucial part of that. And I think it's important to understand the logic when we are taking joint decisions. Sometimes people say that it's Brussels who are forcing us, etc. This is not the case. I mean, we are co-legislating between governments and European Parliament. But the idea is, instead of having 28 or really 31 national legislations for how those things are to be produced or whatever, we have one. That is not centralized. That is joint legislation in order to have a common market. If you don't have a common legislation, you can't have a common market. And if you don't have a common market, you will not get the expansion of investments. And to my colleague over there, I would like to stress that the investments from Russia and China are marginal compared to the investments and the trade from European Union. And I think this is an important part to understand, because this is a consequence of our economies merging more and more together, but also that Serbia has ambitions that are far outreaching the ones that can be fulfilled with trade with China and Russia, because you're aiming to be a modern economy, and then you need to turn to modern economies. I now maybe delayed the dinner even more, but I'm looking forward to it.
Hvala gospodine Hochmark na
Thank you, Mr. Hochmark, for your very appropriate conclusion as regards the forthcoming developments. You know that very good investment is more than welcome in the Republic of Serbia, so we welcome all messages along those lines, inviting more investments. Thank you, everybody, for... We conclude our first day, and at 8 o'clock we will have a joint dinner, which we shall also be discussing the amendments, the recommendations, and tomorrow we start work at 9.